Wednesday, which is September 19th. Our voting session includes first reading ordinance amending Chapter 3.04 Ethics of the Takoma Park Code, and a resolution providing for a reappointment to the Tree Commission. And we'll have a presentation from our city manager on the Takoma Park property tax structure for commercial properties. Then on Monday, September 24th, we have a joint meeting with the Commemoration Commission. This is a meeting that was actually scheduled back in March, but had to be rescheduled because of the snowstorm at the time. And this is to hear the recommendations from the Commemoration Commission regarding the renaming of streets in Takoma Park that were named after generals in the Civil War. And then on Wednesday, September 26th, we begin our meeting in an administrative function session at 6 p.m. to discuss the city manager's evaluation. Our public meeting begins at 7:30, and we have a voting session. Tentatively, we have the first reading ordinance approving traffic calming for the 700 block of Houston Avenue. Tentatively, the first reading ordinance approving traffic calming for Hilltop Road. We have the first reading ordinance approving payment in lieu of taxes for 126 to 128 Lee Avenue. We have the second reading ordinance amending Chapter 3.04 Ethics of the Takoma Park Code. A single reading ordinance authorizing the purchase of digital signage for the interior of the community center. A resolution providing for appointments to the Ethics Commission, appointments to the Committee on the Environment, and other appointments to committees are tentatively scheduled. That takes us then to the next week, which is Wednesday, October 3rd. On October 3rd, we will have, for the record, 2 proclamations, one for Energy Efficiency Day, which is on October 5th, and another regarding Indigenous Peoples Day on October 8th. We will have a voting session that evening. Tentatively scheduled is a second reading ordinance approving traffic calming for the 700 block of Houston Avenue. Tentatively scheduled is a second reading ordinance approving traffic calming for Hilltop Road, and the second reading ordinance approving the payment in lieu of taxes for 126 and 128 Lee Avenue. And those are our upcoming meetings. As always, you can find the full agenda packets and upcoming council meetings on our website. Tonight we have a public hearing on request for traffic calming for the 700 block of Houston Avenue, and then a public hearing on traffic calming for Hilltop Road between Geneva Avenue and Mississippi Avenue. Before we begin tonight, I want to first apologize to residents who live on Kennebec, who we had the intention of mailing out a notice of the public hearing to those residents as well, and those did not go out as we had planned. And so we have received, and I want to note for my colleagues in your blue folder, the city clerk has comments we have received regarding both of the public hearings. In addition, we also want to welcome our visitors this evening. Which Cub Scout troop are you?
Solid.
So we're troop 33 from Takoma Park.
Good, you can go. Just tell us who you are.
Sure. Hello.
Oh, I need to turn on your mic. Sorry. Hold on 1 second.
Hello. We're troop 32 from Takoma Park. We're here to work on our community merit badge.
Terrific.
So that's about it.
Welcome. Thank you for
Thank you.
coming this evening.
Thanks for having
And
us.
if we go a little late, we don't mind you getting up and leaving. We take no offense to that at all. So we know tonight is a school night, so thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Terrific. All right, we will start the public hearing. I have a sign-up sheet, but if you didn't get a chance to sign up, after people who did sign up, you will be able to speak. The first is the Houston Avenue traffic calming, and I have Mr. David Daddio is the first person who signed up. If you want to come to the podium and state your name and your address, and you'll have 3 minutes.
I'm David Daddio. It's my first time at the council meeting, on my first time weighing in on issues around town. 718 Kennebec Avenue. Appreciate Jared and hosting the meeting a couple months ago with Donald and his neighbors on Houston. First time I ever met those folks. really sympathize with their concerns, understand that they feel like there's some safety issues on their block, and support, their push to have traffic calming on their block, support speed bumps, chicanes, curb extensions, bulb outs, whatever it is that they want to do on their block, but coming in opposition to the one-way street proposal. Feel like that's a rather dramatic departure from the current circulation patterns in our neighborhood. It has the potential to, first of all, I should say, one-way streets are not traffic calming. They're traffic hastening measures. Basically, this proposal is going to push over 500 cars onto our street a day based on the traffic study that the city did. It's likely to push bus routes onto our street and away from the low-income residents on Houston, something that the city's analysis didn't point out. So I guess I'm concerned that it's a dramatic departure. It's going to speed up traffic, not only on our block, increase traffic not only on our block, but also I think speed up traffic on their block as well. So prefer to keep it a two-way street. That's kind of the current thought process in transmission planning, so I'm not clear why one-way streets are even an option for the city's traffic calming ordinance. Thanks for your time.
Great, next I have Grant Dickey.
Hello, good evening. Thank you, Mayor Stewart, and thank you, Council. So I'm Grant Dickey. I live with my wife Elizabeth Graber in 719 Kennebec Avenue. Well, I just want to say that I share sympathy with the folks on Houston Avenue. We too have a child coming all the way in January, and so I would be concerned as well. I can understand the fear of having buses and stuff on your street and the effect it may have on children. I bike every day to work, so I also am worried about traffic and buses and so forth. We have several blind corners on our street. There's a very steep hill, as you just heard, and so I'm also concerned, and I think there could be a more comprehensive solution. I think that the idea of traffic calming is certainly a good one and sound. The one-way street, as David mentioned, is definitely alarming because that's going to shift a lot of activity on our street. So that's it. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. And then the next person we have signed up is Rick is coming.
Got my 3-minute timer. Thank you, Mayor and council members. I'm Rick Coonahan. I live at 717 Kennebec Avenue with my wife, Kara, and my 2 kids who are at Silver Spring International Middle School. I'm here because I oppose a proposal to make Houston one-way, fine with speed bumps, etc. But our street is also narrow. Now, I've been told that their street is a little bit narrower than ours, but it doesn't make enough difference. On our street, one car has to pull over for another car to pass when they're going this way. So to make Houston one way will add traffic to our street. There are at least a dozen kids on our street between Flower and Maple on Kennebec, of a variety of different ages. And congratulations, Grant, for another one on the way. And our kids took the elementary school bus, and my wife has seen school buses slide down Kennebec because it's the steepest street in that part of the neighborhood. So adding additional buses and additional traffic, I'm very much opposed to that. I'm going to stop there and just say I am opposed to one-way on Houston. But I do want to say I'm very much in favor of LED street lights, and they're huge energy-saving technology. I'm in the clean energy business, and I used to work for a small city in California, roughly the size of Takoma Park, in the planning department in the 1980s. And at that time, we switched from mercury vapor lamps to sodium vapor lamps, from the blue ones to the orange ones. Everybody, it was horrible, these different lights, it's just terrible. People got used to them. Now they're used to the orangish lights. People can get used to LEDs, and we can save a lot of money and energy. Thank you. 2 minutes.
Thank you. Terrific. All right, is there anyone else who would like to speak during the public hearing. Okay, you just come right up. Yeah. Hello, thank you for having me. This is the first time I've spoken. I've lived here for almost 17 years, so I'm pretty excited to be here. But I also live on Kennebec. I'm at 711 Kennebec. My name is Kara Honzak. I am representing at least my household and several of my neighbors that couldn't be here tonight because of back to school nights. We have 3 children ourselves. I have lived there for 13 years, and I think one of the things I want to add to what some of my neighbors on my street said is the first thing that really alarmed me, which takes me back about 10 or 13 years to when I was a first-time mom in this neighborhood and watched a hearing and was just an observer because I didn't know I had any skin in the game. And now I wish I had paid more attention, and so I'm paying attention now. I was really struck by what we would call NIMBYism, not in my backyardism, with the hearing that took place over what subsequently became the I guess traffic calming on the Silver Spring side on Park Valley Road. It has actually really impacted on our neighborhood in really negative ways. I hope that it did lead to the traffic calming they had hoped for it to do, but I was surprised there wasn't more way for people to actually walk up and down that street. And I guess my point being, I would like to see this time us take a more holistic and comprehensive approach to solving traffic calming on a single street. It sounds like there are a number of streets that are having similar issues. And we're about to see a big project happen on Flower Avenue. It seems premature to me to be making these kinds of big decisions that would change traffic patterns, change habits at an inappropriate time. And I also really think that we need to be trying to think of more creative solutions to these kinds of problems. And most alarmingly, I understand, and I may be misinformed, that all of the people living in the block lower down on the hill on the road in question here have not actually signed on to anything, or I don't know to what degree they've been consulted. I know it was a mistake that Arch Street wasn't consulted, but we have a lot of multi-unit buildings on our street as well as on that street in question, with hundreds, I'm sure, of children and other people who rely exclusively on public services. Oh, is that my time?
You got 25
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Great. Anyone else like to speak? And just to let you know, when the beep goes off, that means you have 30 seconds.
Hi, my name is Alexandra Reyes Pinkston, and I am from 707 Houston Avenue, and I guess I do represent my street. A few of the people couldn't get here tonight. My husband, who actually spearheaded this, is out of the country right now. So as you were discussing, I do actually agree that we do have a problem with people walking up and down the street, not having a real way to walk up and down. There is one sidewalk on my street, and people choose to walk in the middle of the street. They choose to walk in the middle of the street with a bus that comes both ways, bus 25, which Kennebec does not have. We actually have 2,000 more cars, I believe it was, per, I don't know what it was during the reading, but we had 2,000 more cars per week than any of the other streets that are in my area. And that was just my 700 block. That actually wasn't the bottom of Houston Avenue. And to your question, yes, we actually went around and we got petitions from all of Houston Avenue. We didn't just do the 700 block. We actually went down and got people to sign the petitions in the apartments down at the end of the street, and they were involved. And there were also, we did put signage out for people to know that this was happening. So it's basically, I understand we all have children. We're all, worried about the fact that people go up and down the street very fast. I'm worried that 2 of my neighbors have had their vehicles, one almost destroyed. Somebody was driving down the street a few years ago, drunk, and basically their car ends up in their front yard. Our street gets a lot of traffic, and that's our issue. And I do understand people's worry about the one-way, and believe me, I probably don't want my street one-way either. But I would like to see speed bumps, and I would like to see traffic calming, and I think it is needed on the block. So thank you, that's all I have.
Great, thank you.
Hi,
I'm Marion McDormand. I'm at 8002 Maple Avenue. And I really agree that we need to look at traffic problems more holistically rather than just a block at a time. And I certainly support all the traffic calming measures that can happen, but I do oppose the one-way street. I think it's a very confusing traffic pattern to have a one-way street that's 1 block long. And a lot of drivers are going to be confused by that. I think it's also going to put more traffic on neighboring streets. And I agree with the previous speaker about the changes that were made on Hilltop and Park Valley Road having a really bad impact on my neighborhood and trying to avoid future negative impacts. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Steve Holmquist. I live at 721 Kennebec Avenue for the last 16 years. I live there with my wife and 2 daughters. Sorry I'm late. I think I walked in the middle of things. I don't have prepared remarks. And I just learned about this really in the last few days. Kind of our block kind of did get together and talk a little bit about it. And I think we're very sympathetic to what the residents, our neighbors a block over, seem to be concerned about. I think we just want to make sure that this problem is addressed holistically and really not shift kind of a problem from one block to another block. I heard the speaker say she wouldn't want her street to be one way, or I certainly understand where they're coming from. The bus situation seems to be to play into this pretty well. A lot of people rely on that bus and where the bus stops are. I would think that there needs to be consultation with others about the bus situation and changing bus routes potentially. Again, just wanted to express my concern and my wish again that as Takoma Park residents, we all pull together and try to look at the whole neighborhood and make sure that the streets work for everybody, including bikers and pedestrians. So thank you very much.
Good evening. Jay Keller, 324 Lincoln Avenue. I'm the chair of the Rec Committee, and so I just want to speak in support for both the Rec Committee and Friends of the Rec Center in support of the land swap you'll be discussing later tonight.
Okay. Mr. Keller, we're in a public hearing regarding traffic calming on Houston Avenue now. So if you can hold this, thank you.
Good evening. My name is Theo Emery. I live at 705 Houston Avenue. I'm a neighbor of Allie's. I've lived there since 2011. I'm speaking in support of the petition. I also agree with the comments that others have made that I think are probably a comprehensive view of some of these issues are definitely worthwhile. I'm one of the folks who Allie mentioned whose car was totaled several years ago by a drunk driver driving, I would estimate, probably 50, 60, 75 miles an hour on our street. The city council cannot prevent somebody from driving drunk, but however, you can prevent them from getting to those speeds. And I believe that they were going that speed because they hit our car, which was thrown probably 40 or 50 feet because of the impact. So that car was moving very fast. Our street is a cut through, and I think if you look at, for example, Flower Avenue between Carroll and Sligo, if you look at Maple between Philadelphia and Carroll Avenue, if you look at Park Valley Road, the common denominator with all of those is they are all cut throughs. And we are a major cut through to Sligo, as is Kennebec. And so I think they have legitimate concerns with respect to what's going to happen with traffic that's moved around. I would just ask that the city council and the city consider some traffic calming measures. I think it would be useful on our block. My wife and I have a 1-year-old son. We'd like him to be safe, and we'd like our neighbors' kids to be safe as well. And it's a lovely street, and we really wish that people didn't see it as a throughway to Flower Avenue. So thank you, and appreciate your hearing my comments.
Any other comments for the public hearing on the request for traffic calming on the 700 block of Houston Avenue? Okay, seeing none, we will now move to this next public hearing, which is a request for traffic calming on Hilltop Road between Geneva Avenue and Mississippi Avenue. So far, I have 2 people signed up. Looks like Ruthie Bushnell. You want to start?
Good evening. My name is Ruthie Bushnell. I live in 201 Hilltop Road for the past 30 years. Hilltop Road is a cut-through from Maple up to Piney Branch, and it's a straightaway right in front of my house that cars fly through in the morning and fly through in the evening, and probably in the middle as well. There is some ways of slowing the cars down that are there already, but it's definitely not enough. I really feel that a speed hump between Geneva and Mississippi would really help out quite a bit. We had a meeting a while back, Terry was there, and that we spoke of some really great ideas to slow down the traffic. It takes time for that to happen. There's still lots to be done. We had a couple of things that happened, but there's still more to be done. But I think the speed hump would definitely help out. My dog was hit once. There's a bus stop right by Mississippi, and it's just awful how the cars fly through. There's a restricted area that cars are not supposed to come through through Hilltop in the morning, in the afternoon, late afternoon, and that is ignored. I walk my dog, I see cars doing it all the time. I really wish there was more police presence there during those times. I've spoken, written. I think they think I'm a pain because I've constantly tell them we need more, and because I haven't seen very much change in that. But it's just people totally ignore the signs, and someone's going to get hurt, and it's just terrible how people zoom around, zoom up and down Hilltop. So I think a speed hump would definitely be something that would help out, but I also think stop signs and painting the lines and things we talked about will also help out. So I hope you agree. Thank you.
Thank you. Next we have Giuseppe, and I'm not going to be able to make out your last name.
Hi, I'm Giuseppe Cimino. Thank you for getting the first part right. Usually people get neither. I'm at 303 Hilltop. I've been there since 1989 and had the pleasure of working with Terry and others on the council over the years for some traffic calming on Hilltop, including the stop signs that we had added at Geneva, as well as the tables, the walkways, and the sidewalk, and the other improvements. I just want to say that I did sign the petition. I am in favor of additional calming. We discussed at the meeting that was referenced earlier with Terry some pavement markings, adding some additional stop signs over where the three-way is at Mississippi and Hilltop, but I am not in favor of a speed bump. We have quite a number of speed bumps, and I value having at least one route home that I know isn't going to loosen a filling. So I want to thank you all for your hard work, and agree that we do need to add some things, but I have a limit. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Those are all the people who signed up for the public hearing on Hilltop Road. Do I have any other folks?
Hello, I'm Paul Boudreau, 312 Mississippi. I will point out that there already is a speed bump at Hilltop and Mississippi. So to add another one at Geneva, I'm not sure how that would work out, because there'd be two speed bumps in an awfully close proximity. Perhaps if more calming is needed, that speed bump could be raised to the level that they are on Mississippi. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comments on this? All right, seeing none then, that will be the end of our public hearings. We will now move on to public comments on voting items. The first voting item is a resolution regarding the Takoma Park Middle School expansion. Do we have a comment on that?
Hi, my name is Elliot Davey. Tonight I'm here representing the Takoma Park Youth Council. I am here to voice the Youth Council's support for this resolution. School overcrowding is something that affects young people across the county, and I know it affects many of the members of the Youth Council who attend either Takoma Middle or Blair, and so we are in support of expanding the middle school to help lessen those effects and combat the negative effects of school overcrowding. And we hope that this will be done in a way that will not be harmful to the surrounding environment, and make sure that the impact on the surrounding community is minimized. But we are in favor of this expansion. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. Any other public comments on the resolution regarding the Takoma Park Middle School expansion? Okay, seeing none, we'll move to our second voting item, which is a resolution approving the purchase of 7906 Flower Avenue by Montgomery County. Okay, seeing no public comments on that, our third voting item tonight is a single reading ordinance authorizing purchase and installation of emergency equipment on replacement police vehicles. Our final voting item tonight is a resolution appointing a legal services advisory group. Okay, seeing no public comments on those voting items, we'll now move to our voting session. And our first item is the resolution regarding Takoma Park Middle School expansion. I don't know if the city manager had any follow-up from our work session last week?
We have a couple of recommendations of changes to the resolution. There were a couple comments. One I don't think needs to be incorporated here about ensuring kind of where a specific path is to get to a field and that kind of thing. This calls for access to the Lee Jordan Field, to the portion that will be able to be used, as well as to the storage facilities. And we will be working with all the various impacted parties about ensuring that. So I don't think that needs to be specifically called out here because the staging location changes over time, so it starts to get confusing. There's no problems that we understand from the MCPS staff about ensuring the access to the field for the use during the construction. The other, I think Councilmember Kovar would be able to better address, and so I think it might be best to go to him for that. Other than that, I've not heard any other changes.
Okay, Councilmember Kovar.
I'd like to say first, I do support the expansion. The student populations in this part of the county and elsewhere too, but especially down here, are, I think, bursting at the seams, and so we really do need to expand the middle school, and I strongly support that, and I'm pleased that the Youth Council recognized that. The one concern I had, and this is a small suggestion, but I would appreciate it if my colleagues would go along with it. There's a lot of construction activity taking place in this general part of the city, and more is expected. And while the language does acknowledge that and talks about in the final resolve clause the need to have negative construction impacts be minimized to the extent possible, I am more and more convinced that in all of these cases it's important to have some sort of written document. And number one, as the city manager has pointed out, this is the county mandatory referral process, so the county is not specifically going to insist that the city do something with the school system, but I think it's important to call out the idea that we would have that just so that people in the community understand it. So what I propose is scale back slightly from what I had originally mentioned in an email I sent around earlier, and so the resolve clause would now read that negative construction impacts be minimized to the extent possible, here's the new language, including through a written agreement as needed for students, staff at the school, as well as residents of surrounding property. So a modest thing, but it just underlines the importance that on all of the work that, substantial work that contractors do in the community, and this is something that we do call out in our council priorities, the idea of ensuring that we have better standards for the work that's being done here, that when possible we have written agreements to implement whatever the guidelines will be for the work that gets done. And so I would encourage my colleagues to support adding that language.
All right, does anyone have any objections or additional language to add before I ask for this to be moved? Councilwoman Kostick?
I would suggest that if we are going to add something like that, we specify who the written agreement is between. Right now it seems like pretty vague language to me. Just saying that negative construction impacts will be minimized. If we want a written document, I think we need to specify that it's between.
Well, I mean, we can say the city and MCPS. I think, and I think that was what was intended. The point that I just want to clarify is that this resolution is to the planning board on this site plan, and so it's a mandatory agreement, a mandatory referral hearing. So it doesn't bind MCPS to anything. We certainly will follow up whether or not this language is in this resolution with MCPS to try to get as close of agreements as we can get. Certainly, I think also, because it's a school, there's lots of PTA, school staff, and students having interest in what the environment is during construction. So I think we'll have good partners for that. But I just wanted to kind of clarify who this resolution is directed to, and it doesn't have the kind of binding weight that it may in a different situation.
If I can just jump. I think it's fine to clarify who the agreement would be with. And I agree with the city manager, it's not binding, but I just think it's really important to underline and signal to the school system that this is something that we'll be expecting. And maybe we would do it anyway, but if we would do it anyway, there's no harm in mentioning it.
Councilwoman Searcy?
So while I think that the points that were raised are important, I'm a little concerned about the nature of a legal or some kind of written agreement between us and MCPS just as it pertains to construction mitigation. And so one thought was, instead of making it more of a formalized written document, could we specify in the be it further resolved that Montgomery County Public Schools staff continue to work with city on issues involving stormwater management, development of a tree protection plan, and notification and mitigation of negative. So it basically says not just that you are supposed to mitigate the negative construction impacts, but that you are to work with the city in terms of addressing those concerns, and not formalizing the point of some sort of written agreement, but that it's resolved that they continue to work with city staff as it relates to construction and the impacts that it may have on the community.
One thing I would just note is the second to the last, be it further resolved, that refers to stormwater management and development of a tree protection plan, are our formal actions that we work with MCPS that are not finalized yet. So that's a little different than what happens during construction. I take your point, but I just wanted to clarify why that's separated.
Yeah, and so again, kind of going back to Councilmember Kovar's point, negative construction impacts be minimized. I get your point that it doesn't really mean anything. It just says minimize the construction impact. It doesn't necessarily say you should work with us to make sure that that happens, or to communicate any kind of construction problems that residents in the neighborhood might experience. So I don't think that we need to go as far as a written agreement, but I do think that there may be some ways in which we could tweak the language a little bit to make it clear that the goal is to work with the city as it relates to construction related matters.
The only thing I would say is that we think we have that type of relationship with, for example, State Highway Administration, and then we find out they come in and spray. And so I just think that more and more we need written agreements. If it's a memorandum of understanding as opposed to a legal agreement, I'm fine. But
All right, since we kind of went out of order,
Yeah.
since I didn't think you were going to propose that amendment then,
Okay.
let's do this properly, especially so that our guests can see how we should let's move the item and then amend it, and we can vote on the amended language. All right, would someone please move the resolution?
Move it.
Councilwoman Searcy, do I have a second?
Second.
Councilmember Siemens, that's a great name. Now, would Councilmember Kovar like to put forward an amendment to the resolution? Thank you.
yes, I would. And let's modify it slightly from before and say that a written agreement or a memorandum of understanding between Montgomery County Public Schools and the city. So I can reread it again, if you wish.
Yeah, let's reread it again.
What it would say, and I'm just going to get it on my device. For those who...
I'm sorry, a memorandum of understanding is a legal document.
Yeah.
So it is it's not lesser than a written agreement. So I just want to be clear.
Well, let's have whatever type of document people would be comfortable with.
Yeah, go ahead.
In the past, with these type of construction projects with the school systems, have we had separate legal documents with them regarding construction or issues that are outside the purview of what is already part of our regulation, like tree
site plan or stormwater management?
No, we try, and sometimes we do have kind of agreements, but because we are not a permitting agency for most of the construction work, those kinds of agreements come as usually permit conditions from Department of Permitting Services or the other entities that do that. So it's, unfortunately, MCPS and the county are bigger than us, and so we don't have the same kind of leverage with them that we do with other entities.
And let me just ask.
That doesn't mean we don't try to have good working relationships and kind of understandings, but in terms of, because I actually, when this came up, I said, do we have some of these that we can use as a model? Is there something? And we really don't.
And so if we found that, for whatever reason, the school system was doing something that we did not like, we would just be able to go to them and ask them nicely not to do it anymore, correct?
We're often persuasive.
Okay, but there's nothing in the code that says that.
No, we don't have that stick.
Okay, thank you.
So hearing the concerns about, and given what the intent of this document is, what if we said, be further resolved that negative construction impacts be minimized to the extent possible through agreements between MCPS and the city for students and staff at the school as well as residents of surrounding properties. So we're not saying it's written, we're not saying it's an MOU, but we are saying there needs to be agreements. You support that? Okay, so do you want to, I'll move the amendment. I move that we change it to say through agreements between MCPS and the city. Do I have a second?
Yes.
Nope. Councilmember Kovar, second. Any discussion of the amendment? All those in favor of the amendment, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right. Any other amendments or discussion on this resolution? No? All those in favor of the resolution, providing comment on the proposed Takoma Park Middle School addition, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Any abstaining? All right. That's a little messier than usual, but we did it.
And just for the public's information, we will be getting this resolution to this planning board promptly because they'll be acting on this tomorrow.
Yes. All right. Our next voting item is a resolution approving the purchase of 7906 Flower Avenue by Montgomery County. We had a work session on this last week. I don't believe there are any updates or anything. Would someone like to move this resolution?
So moved.
Councilmember Smith moved. Do I have a second? Councilmember DeBala. Any questions or comments?
I would just say very quickly, I'm excited to see the county investing money in Takoma Park. Thank you.
Yes. Excellent. And I would just like to say, given the resolution we just passed and this one, and the fact that we all just learned that Montgomery County has a moratorium on new housing construction in Takoma Park, Silver Spring, parts of Bethesda, and Wheaton, I am very glad to see things like this moving forward. So, all those in, Councilwoman DeBala?
This is a renovation.
Yes. But it's housing.
County money.
It's housing.
It's housing. Oh,
It's
I think
housing.
this is fabulous.
And it's county money.
And it's county money.
I'm good.
So, all right. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstaining? Great. Next, we have a single reading ordinance authorizing purchase and installation of emergency equipment on replacement police vehicles. Does someone like to move the ordinance? Councilmember Siemens, do I have a second?
Second.
Councilmember Smith. Any questions regarding this or discussion?
Clarifying question?
Yep.
So the 5 replacement vehicles and equipment for them were in the fiscal 19 budget, and we authorized purchase of the vehicles in July, and I thought we authorized some equipment or systems or something with that, and so this is another piece of it?
That's right. This, there's certain things that come with it at the time, and then
Okay,
there's other
so-
things you have to get at the later time.
Right, okay, so the answer is, this is the add-on, that was the stuff that came with the car.
Correct.
Thank you.
All right, since this is a single reading ordinance, we need a roll call.
Councilmember Kovar. Councilmember DeBala.
Aye.
Councilmember Costick. Councilmember Siemens.
Aye.
Councilmember Smith.
Yes.
Councilmember Searcy. Mayor Stewart.
Yes. All right, the next voting item we have is a resolution appointing a legal services advisory group, and on this one, let's give a little background since our deputy city manager is not sitting up here with us because of a leak. So the council discussed this in a work session in July 18th, this past summer, to talk about the formation of a legal services review advisory group. Consistent with the attached charter, which you can see on the city website, the primary objective of the Legal Services Review Advisory Group is to review and document the city's legal services needs currently and what we expect in the near future, the manner in which those needs are currently being met, advantages and disadvantages of the existing structure and processes, and secondly, to provide recommendations to the City Council for how to meet the city's legal services needs in the future. And so the City Council has been discussing over the last few months as different projects come up and our work is ever expanding, the need to step back and take a look at our legal services. So if we adopt this resolution tonight, we will be appointing former council member Rizwan Qureshi, Ann Hollander, a resident of Ward 5, Ellie Kopel, Ward 2 resident, and Ellen Zavian, a Ward 3 resident, to serve on the Legal Services Review Advisory Committee, and we ask them to bring back a completed report to the City Council by February 1st of 2019. Would someone like to please move the resolution?
Yes.
Councilmember Siemens, Councilmember DeValler. Second, any discussion or comments on this? None. All those in favor of the resolution appointing a Legal Services Review Advisory Group, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstaining? Awesome. Very excited about that. All right. Next, we have public comments on just general topics. And before we do that, Councilwoman DeValler asked me to, would you like to make the announcement? Or the city manager on Dorothy's Woods?
Okay. Let me get to my notes.
Okay. Peter's song.
So the city has entered into an agreement with Fairview Investment Fund, which is the owner of a deed of trust secured by the Dorothy Woods property, which is an open space property near the Washington McLaughlin School, to prevent the sale of property via foreclosure auction and preserve the city's interest in and control over the property. Pursuant to the agreement, the city will pay Fairview $250,000 in exchange for Fairview's release of Dorothy's Woods property from the lien of the deed of trust and Fairview's dismissal of its foreclosure action against the city, in which it sought to originally collect approximately $382,000 from the sale of the property. The City Council made the decision based on its recognition of the importance of the environmental benefits of the parcel. Approximately $100,000 of the negotiated amount will be paid for using donations from a group of people who on their own accord offered funds, with the goal of potentially supplementing city funds in order to maintain city ownership of the parcel. The council will be discussing where the remainder of the unbudgeted funds will come from, whether from cost savings or from reserves at a future work session. And I'm sure that many wish to express their deep appreciation of residents for trying to assist the city and the community on this purchase.
Terrific. Thank you very much. And so with that now, we'll just open up to public comments, and they can be on. Mr. Keller, would you like to start?
Get that in order. Thank you. Jay Keller, 324 Lincoln Avenue. I want to speak in thank you on the Dorothy's Woods. That's great news. I'm a contributor to the fund, so this is good to hear about. I wanted to speak in support of the land swap for the rec center. I think this is a great move. It's stuff we've been discussing for years and years, and so I'm pleased that hopefully will move along. I think as we acquire the land, hopefully, racial equity outreach to underserved communities and even affordable housing options are going to be something that we're going to need to discuss. So I look forward to continuing in that discussion. I know the Friends of the Rec Center and all the members of the Recreation Committee are very supportive of this land swap. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
Good evening. My name's Wayne Sherwood. I live on Grant Avenue, and thanks to the council and to the city staff for being here. I'd like to talk a little bit about the rec center as well. It's been on our agenda as a city for quite a long time. I've been interested in it for numerous years. And I'm beginning to think more and more what a great opportunity this could be. I know that many years ago it was talked about primarily as something's got to be done with the rec center. And we didn't own it, and we had a hard time dealing with Montgomery County Rec, and people said we can't really invest in here, and Montgomery County Rec wasn't very interested in putting more money in it. And now, I mean, the more I've thought about it, the more I see what a wonderful opportunity it is. As many people have said, you know, we need to maintain our racial and economic equity, and we need to, I think, be more aware that our city would be helpful if our city invested more time and energy and money in certain neighborhoods that might have been underinvested in the past, especially ones where they've been kind of neglected by the county. And so I would just like to encourage us, as you all know, as I've been mentioning before, that we really kind of think outside of the box for this place, and we not think of it just in terms of expanding the box for recreation, although that's obviously needed, but as the other kinds of things that Jay mentioned, the possible services that are extending out into the neighborhood, possibly affordable housing. I mean, the potential zoning there is, from the previous recommendations of various things like the sector plan, could be a substantially larger building on that site. And if it were possible to acquire the unused parcel just to the north of the rec center, that's a substantial piece of land, and then there's a little bit of extra space to the south. So I would like us to think in terms in advance of what can we do? What's the neighborhood needs? What is the neighborhood within that potential area as the starting point, rather than thinking about it in terms of, well, we have a box here and we have to expand it for recreational purposes. And I think any signals that you can give at this point in time would be very helpful that's what you're looking for as a city council, because otherwise, you get into a situation where 2 years down the line and people start coming up with these kinds of ideas, and neighbors would say, well, that isn't what we thought was going to happen. That isn't what you started out. We thought it was just going to be a rec center. So anything you can do as a city council at this point to say that you're ready to think outside of the box and try some really innovative stuff, I'd really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comments this evening?
Arthur David Olson, Hancock Avenue. 2 days ago, the council held a closed session announced as being on legal advice concerning Dorothy's Woods. Based on statements made by officials since then, and based on what's not on tonight's agenda, my understanding is that not only was legal advice received, but a decision was made to enter into a $250,000 legal agreement. That's in the neighborhood of 1% of the city's operating budget, so it's a fairly big decision. I'm less concerned with the decision itself than with how the decision was made. It may have been made within the letter of Maryland's Sunshine Law. It may have been made in the spirit of Maryland's Sunshine Law. But I'm pretty sure it wasn't made in the spirit of Takoma Park, and I'm absolutely sure it wasn't made in the spirit I'd like to see. I don't want decisions made in a back room, even if it's in the front of the building and even if it's not smoke-filled. Because the decision was made in closed session, I may never know what council members' considerations were in making it. I may never know how council members voted on the decision. I may even never know exactly what the decision was. As a voter, I may be left in the dark. And as it says each day at the top of the Washington Post, democracy dies in darkness. In my ideal world, my city council would be one such that if something can't be done in the open, it isn't done. That would impose some restraints. For example, you'd either get to evaluate the city manager in public or abandon such evaluations. But I believe the benefits of open government outweigh the costs. here in the real world, if you do feel compelled to get legal advice in closed session, I hope that when the time comes to make a decision, you'll come on downstairs and do it in public. Tonight's schedule is proof that you can have both closed and open meetings on the same night. I hope you'll do so for decision-making purposes in the future. You can count on me to come to those decision meetings. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Olson.
Good evening. I'm Susie Stimler, and I live on Conway Avenue in Ward 2. On behalf of many citizens throughout Takoma Park who have contributed in many ways to Dorothy's Woods, whether financial or hard work of their own hands, I'd like to thank Mayor Stewart and all of the council members for your hard work to preserve Dorothy's Woods. From the resolution expressing support for preserving the wooded area in 2015, to the actual purchase at auction, to the resolution authorizing the covenant upon the lands in 2017, to your most recent actions to prevent the sale via foreclosure. I'm just so grateful. Thank you. I'd also like to shout out the city's attorneys and staff members, because I know you've put in many hours of work to reduce the encumbrances on the property, to share this little special space for all of us in Takoma Park, so thank you.
Hello, I'm Elizabeth Thompson on Elm Avenue. I also want to thank you guys for your decision on Dorothy's Woods. I'm always so impressed with the way that the city council manages to balance so many different things to create this bubble of hope for citizens, I think especially for children. My kids are in love with the woods. They felt super proud when they saw their mayor stand up for rights of people who don't always have the rights that they should. There are just so many different decisions that you all balance that make it a place that we're so proud to call home. So I want to thank you. We also have slightly sticky thank you notes for the for the city council, and I wish I had one for all the staff too. You guys, you did really limit the amount of finances that had to be invested, and we so appreciate it.
Great. Any other public comments this evening?
Hello, I'm Margot Bass, a 17-year resident of Takoma Park, and my comments may sound a little familiar, but I just had to say this for it to go on record. I'm very appreciative of the huge successes of the mayor and this city council in achieving conservation of Dorothy's Woods again. It was clear from before the IRS auction in 2015 that any purchaser faced a complex and risky path to full ownership. The city has now, amazingly, reached the finish line, overcoming major obstacles with phenomenal leadership by the mayor and the council, accompanied by precision execution by city staff and legal counsel. The milestones on this remarkable path include the mayor and city council reaching consensus to enter the IRS auction within a highly pressured timeline, separating the parcel from the Washington McLaughlin Christian School's other two parcels, paying off the county debts, recouping the city's debts, putting a strict conservation covenant on the land, and having HUD release the lien from the woods. All of these were achieved with a small net investment of the city in the amount of some $70,000 plus city staff and legal time. Then, presented with the unlikely foreclosure on Dorothy's Woods by Fairview due to a previous lien on the Washington McLaughlin School, the mayor and city council summoned the leadership, the resources, and the strategy to continue to conserve this forest. This was done in a way that used taxpayer money very frugally. Pursuant to the agreement, the city will pay Fairview only $250,000 in exchange for Fairview's release of the Dorothy Woods property from the lien and Fairview's dismissal of its foreclosure action against the city. Fairview had sought to collect much more, $382,000. So there was clearly great negotiating. Thank you. I also wanted to say the great work was done by team captains on the fundraising, Satjeev and Nikolai Kalse, Elizabeth Thompson and Catherine Tunis, in raising over $100,000 in about 2 weeks. I'm very happy to live in a city where the government can achieve successes in the interest of all the residents and conservation. This forest will continue to control stormwater runoff for many surrounding streets and homes, clean the city air, and control the extensive air pollution coming from New Hampshire Avenue, benefiting young and elderly residents alike throughout our city. Dorothy's Woods also keeps the city cooler, reducing energy demands. It also sequesters large amounts of carbon. Thank you, Mayor and City Council members. And city staff.
Thank you. Hey, any other? Ms. Michui?
Sorry, I'm not contagious.
She's not contagious.
Probably some mold in my basement.
So many people with mold and water in their basements, maybe get a special dispensation, so many people, Anyway, excuse me, Mary Jane Michui, Ward 2, sorry. I would like to say this statement, live simply so that others can simply live. I never really thought too much of that. I've been in a Quaker for many years, and that was one of the statements I heard bandied about, but it wasn't until recently with the gentrification, which is not really recent, but getting a lot worse, that I started seeing the logic behind it. I would just like to make these statements, please. People, including postal workers, and we have a very nice one who's an immigrant woman, and she's very nice, and thank you, Casey, for listening to me. They have to walk on both, underline both sides of the street. Why are other people allowed to have bushes and things that stick out into the road often so you can't walk on the other side of the street? And also would like to know, as my part of my POSNA president thing, is this, what's happening to this $10,000 that was supposed to be allocated for the recreation class for special needs people. So far has not happened, and I'm just wondering what's happened, what's happening. This letter was in July 2017, so I'm just wondering what's happening. And this is another thing, as far as many people as we age have difficulty navigating the narrow and narrow streets, and I see here I'm complaining about the new people, but a lot of them have SUVs. There's more and more SUVs I've noticed in my street than ever before, but the streets are getting narrower and narrower, and the parking spaces are getting narrower and narrower, and my eyesight is not getting better, unfortunately. And speed humps are causing me more and more pain as I go over, and especially the extremely high ones, which I think are not necessary. And I'd like to have a moratorium of all speed humps at street narrows except in front of daycare centers, senior and handicap buildings, and primary schools. That's where they belong, I feel. And it would save the city money too. And last of all, if the city, this is my biggest one, if the city can regulate how much landlords can charge, how about regulating how much homes can be sold for? I am sick and tired of all this stuff about my son cannot afford to live here when I die. I can barely afford it. My tiny house was assessed for over $6,000, which I cannot afford right now. And I've been bitching to the council about the Montgomery County Council. I'm sorry about that, but I've been giving them a hard time. But my son, he's making about $12 an hour.
Thank you, Ms. Michui.
Thank you.
Have a nice evening. Thank you for coming tonight. Any other public comments this evening? Okay, seeing none, now we will move on to council comments. Any council comments tonight? Councilmember Siemens?
Thank you, Mayor. I certainly appreciate Mr. Olson's desire for maximum openness by this council. I think we've always strived to do that in the past. And I would like to ask my colleagues on the council to join me in directing the city manager to provide a brief summary of the closed sessions as soon as it's reasonable to release that information. The closed session question.
I assumed that that would come.
I just want to
certainly
make
be
sure
made.
that,
Yes.
since it is a closed session, it does take the body of the council to approve
That's right.
releasing that. Thank you.
Is that it?
That's it.
Okay. Councilman DeBala?
Yes, I have three things. The first is thanks to all of the residents over the past 3 years who have worked so hard, both as volunteers on the property. Maybe some of you Boy Scouts were Cub Scouts and worked out there last winter in the cold. It's not just, it's a very special place to a lot of people, and I am very grateful for everybody on the council, on the staff, and especially the residents for making it possible for this property to be protected. Why is it important to me? So I see it as a citywide issue. I see it as fitting in with our priorities on environment and climate change, especially on climate change. It is a significant investment. There's no question about it, and we'll have to work really hard to get that to work out within the existing budget. But and it was an unexpected investment, but it is an investment in our future, and I feel that it was the right move. And I'm sorry about the circumstances of the decision, but I completely support what Councilmember Seaman said about releasing a summary of the closed session. My second item is this coming Tuesday, 7 o'clock, Police Safety, 513 Elm, for anybody who wants to come and talk about what's been going on in the Forest Park neighborhood, or anybody else in Ward 2 who wants to pick up some tips about how to keep your property and your neighborhood and your car safe. And last, Lincoln Avenue sidewalks, are you going to be talking about that? Okay. I understand the construction is expected to start in early October, and there is a tentative meeting date of September 27th. I was just going to hold up 7 fingers and hope you could see it. But yeah, so I'm really excited about that too. And I'm really looking forward to the discussion on the rec center, because I completely agree with folks who have said that we need to look at investments in all parts of the city and the needs of the variety of communities that we have here. Thank you.
Councilmember Kovar.
Thank you, Mayor. A few things I wanted to mention. One, the rainfall that we saw just a short time ago, and of course the really serious rainfall that people are going to be experiencing in the Carolinas and elsewhere, is a good reminder of what's been happening here lately. And I think it's hard to know for sure if it's just we had some serious storms that we may not get again, or if this is becoming kind of the new normal. But just within the past couple of months, I guess I would say, I've been contacted by about 4 separate groups in different parts of Ward 1, all of whom have experienced or are beginning to experience now water overflow, stormwater flows, in some cases sewer backups, at amounts and levels and rates that they didn't previously. And I have exchanged some emails about the topic and spoken briefly with the Public Works Director who is here today. And I don't think that there's a single answer. Obviously, it's very expensive to try to address that kind of infrastructure question, but I'd like to suggest that maybe before the year is up, we could have a work session, if we can find the schedule for it, potentially with WSSC or the relevant county people or state people or whoever it is, to try to begin to explore, is this a systemic issue and what are some of the steps that we can take to address it. So put that out there. Secondly, this is just for next year's budget, something for us to think about, but I'm going to mention it now because it was brought to my attention and I've talked to the city manager about it. We have some after-school child care programs, and there's a waiting list, and it's through the Recreation Department, and it's not as if you can just get rid of a waiting list, and the only way to do that is to have more physical space or more staff and so on. But the waiting list is substantial. I think when we're looking at next year's budget, that's at least something we could take a look at what it would mean to try to address it. Third, on the PEPCO activity in North Takoma, there's going to be a community meeting for anybody from that part of the city or elsewhere who's interested, but in particular for North Tacoma folks next week, Tuesday the 18th, starting at 7:30, and that's actually going to take place not in the community center, but in a room in the Montgomery College campus, room 116 in the Smith Commons. It might be easier for North Tacoma people to go there. So we'll have representatives of PEPCO and also the contractor that's doing the work. And just two remaining things. I circulated to my colleagues a petition from some residents. It was signed by about 60 residents who live near or whose children walk through the intersection where Park Avenue and Philadelphia Avenue, Route 410 come together. It's a wide, Y-shaped intersection. People who are driving basically from the community center up toward the fire station typically move pretty quickly through that turn onto Park, because it's not a right turn, but more of a bearing right kind of turn, and it's a one-way street, and it's a very wide distance to walk across, and so for kids walking to school in particular, it's not that safe. So I did share the petition. It's something that we mentioned to State Highway in the recent meeting, and I understand from the Public Works Director that it's something that they've looked at. We don't have an immediate answer for it, but I'd like us to continue working on that. And just finally, on Dorothy's Woods, I want to just follow up on something that Councilmember Duvall said. I think the way the financial piece of this worked out is positive, and I appreciate the fact that there were some people in the community willing to contribute. I think it's really important, and this is something that I said in the closed session, that we find an amount equal to the city's contribution from this year's budget to not spend on whatever it was allocated for. It could come from more than one spot to offset this additional unexpected expenditure, so that we have a net no cost, no additional cost to the city from making the purchase. Thank you.
Great, and I would just like to ask the city manager to make a note that we send a formal letter to the residents who sent us the petition, outlining what we heard back from the Director of Public Works, and next steps on that. Yeah, that we should send a formal letter to them. Thank you. Councilwoman Searcy.
Great. Good evening, everyone. So I just want to thank city staff, Sarah, for responding to my plethora of questions about various issues. Thank you so much for the timely response. I want to thank residents and staff and others who were able to participate in the lunch with the mayor last week, to have an opportunity to chat with Julio and others. It was a really great opportunity to talk shop over tacos, which is great, and the food was amazing. Thank you to the residents in Hillwood Manor. Fingers crossed we will be able to have the barbecue, maybe. I don't know. We got postponed to this Saturday, and so it's looking like we might get rained out twice, but I'm still holding out hope for the invitation to walk through their gardens. So thank you for that. Also, I appreciate the opportunity this week to be able to participate in the Tacoma Langley Crossroads board meeting. It was a wonderful opportunity to hear about things such as LED light issues from the perspective of those that are running businesses in commercial districts and the desperate needs that are there. So also want to remind people about the Crossroads Night Market that will be happening on September the 29th from 4 until 7:30 on Ann Street between University Boulevard and Hammond Avenue. And since my colleagues are kind of talking a little bit about decisions made in terms of Dorothy's Woods, I believe in transparency wholeheartedly, and will be forthright in saying I raised a number of concerns. I appreciate what the woods are and the value to the city. I think it's important for the city to own property such as that. However, I raised a number of concerns about cost, particularly understanding the full cost of something like acquiring Dorothy's Woods, not just the final sell price, but also prior cost investments that were made, and not having a clear understanding of what those costs were, nor a clear understanding of what those costs might be in the future. I raised a number of concerns about making decisions to spend a large amount of our current budget without a clear understanding of where we would cut. We had some really hard discussions and really made some really hard decisions this budget season in terms of what we would be able to fund and what we would not be able to fund. And not having some sort of an understanding of what we might have to get rid of in order to direct funds to Dorothy's Woods was problematic for me. I also continue to have concerns about directing city resources as a result of fundraising activities by a number of residents in the community. It is not good business practice for us to allow donations to dictate where taxpayer dollars go. There are definitely areas of the city that are more affluent. There are residents that are more affluent than others and have the resources and the wherewithal to ensure that their agenda is met. It is up to us to make sure when we work towards equity and ensuring that there is an equitable distribution of services throughout the city, that we are not being completely swayed by the resources of the few. So again, I look forward to the city manager's debrief and sharing the thoughts that were raised during the closed session. But I did want to take this opportunity to be very vocal about what the concerns were that I had. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Smith?
A few things. First off, I would like to thank my colleague, Councilmember Searcy, for bringing up some very important things that the council, I think, should discuss in the future in a work session. This has been an issue in the past. We've not really dealt with it. And there probably will be another situation similar to Dorothy's Woods. So I think that's something that we need to discuss as a council. And I do want to thank Councilmember Dabala for leading this effort. I know it was difficult. You know, it was also difficult when Councilmember Mail was in the seat trying to put all this together. So I appreciate, you know, your efforts, but we do need to think about using residents' resources and matching that with city resources and how that dictates our agenda. You know, I would like to thank the Scouts for coming tonight. I appreciate seeing you young people. I hope some of you will get involved in local government. Please don't just get the badge, right, to forget about us. It's really important to get people involved young, you know. We need you. We need you to be up here eventually, making decisions for your community. I would like to ask the city manager to give a Flower Avenue update. She doesn't have to do it this evening, but we thought that construction was going to happen this summer. We ran into some problems, some setbacks, nothing too major, but I think residents would want to know why construction hasn't started yet. And regarding the LEDs on Flower Avenue, do the LEDs stretch the entire length of the street from Carroll to Piney Branch? Okay.
Yes,
I just want to make sure. Yes. Okay. Good. I want to give a special thank you to Terry Siemens, Councilmember Siemens. I meant to thank him a while ago, but so many things were going on. During the ceremony for my father, only one flag is given, and that flag was given to my stepmom. So my biological mom, my mother, who raised me, did not get a flag. So Terry was very generous. He had a flag that had flown above the U.S. Capitol, and he gave that flag so I could give it to my mother, and she really appreciated it. So I want to thank you, not just from me, but from my family.
You're quite welcome, but I full disclosure, that did come from the Independence Day Committee.
Well, it passed through you, right?
Yes, it did. You're quite welcome.
Thank you. I want to thank the Tenant Association at Essex House for hosting an ice cream social this past Sunday. This has become a tradition at this property, and I want to thank all of the leadership and board members for helping out with the ice cream social. And then, finally, Thursday, September 20th, is going to be the first Montgomery Chapter MML meeting. It will be hosted by the City of Rockville, so please get there at 6:30. 6:15 would be better. Dinner is served, so the Board of Education will be there to discuss the school system in the county. So please, if you can attend September 20th, everyone should have received the list from Monica Marquina, Secretary of the chapter. Thank you.
And Councilwoman Costick, who
Thank you.
you've
I think my microphone's finally stopped ringing. So thank you. It's kind of strange to be over here and see you all from over here. It's a little different. I just have a couple of things. I wanted to remind people that Sunday is the Folk Festival at the Takoma Park Middle School from 10:30 a.m. until 6 p.m. I know I and probably many of my colleagues will be there, so stop by and say hello to us, see some great music, see some great performances, hear some great music, enjoy the craft show, do all the great things that are there. And then I also want to just say a couple of words related to Dorothy's Woods as well. I want to thank all of the residents who have been involved in the process, donating their time, donating their energy, donating their money to preserve this resource in our city. I think Councilmember Searcy raised some really important questions and things that I think we really need to address as a city and think about as we're moving forward. In this case, I do think we made the right choice. I think it was important for us to preserve this land for its environmental benefits, for its cultural benefits to us as a community, its value that it provides. But I think we do need to look holistically at our processes and how we're moving forward with priorities and what happens when we have situations like this in the future. And it is absolutely true that this is not a small amount of money that the city is donating or is dedicating to this purchase or to this payment, and it will be difficult to find the places to take it from. So that's definitely something that we weighed as council in our discussions, and I hope that those discussions and the things that we considered in the process will be available through the write-up that's provided to residents. So thank you.
Councilwoman DeValla, did you have something else to say?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I agree that we need to look at the policy for how and when we work in partnership with residents, whether it's on projects or whether it's on funds that support goals that everyone in the community has agreed on. And I've offered to draft a policy to talk about that with the rest of the council.
Thank you. I have a number of items this evening. First, I'll just continue on Dorothy Woods. I just want to thank the residents who not only came tonight, but others who came out in support of it. And I'm glad that we are able to come to this resolution. And I just want to say I very much appreciate my colleagues for a very thoughtful process, and the staff as well. I have said this in the past, but maybe not so recently, how much I really do appreciate all of my colleagues and the different points of view that we bring to our discussions. And so I think we landed in a good place, and I'm looking forward to continuing working with my colleagues, not just on these issues, but others. While I'm on Dorothy's Woods, I wanted to raise the point about climate change, because it's a reality, and we're facing it as a community, even as our national government rolls back efforts to, fight back against climate change. I think we do a really good job, or we work on mitigation in the city. That means, reducing our emissions. We've had programs in the past. Purchasing of Dorothy Woods is a good example. I hope those who supported the purchase of Dorothy's Woods because of climate change also weigh in on our discussion on LED streetlights, because I feel like that is also a great example of how we can cut our emissions in the city. I do think we have to face reality and move also in the direction of looking at adaptation and adapting to the changes that are facing us because of climate change. As my colleague, Councilmember Kovar, mentioned, the severe weather, the flooding of basements, as Ms. Machui has mentioned, has increased. And it's increased rapidly. I would say the city manager and I were talking about this, even in just the last year, the number of places that have been experiencing flooding in our city has really increased. And so I'm not sure talking to WSSC is what going to get us necessarily anywhere, but I do think as we move into our priorities discussion in January and our budget for next year, I would like us to not just think about where we can put in programs or policies to reduce emissions, but I think we need to move into looking at adaptation. The next item is this morning, the city manager, the head of public works, and myself met with State Highway, our district manager, and the assistant district engineer for maintenance regarding the spraying of pesticides on Ethan Allen that was done by SHA at the end of August. We received a resounding apology for the spraying of pesticides that was done, and promised that it would never happen again, and that they would be putting into place a number of procedures to ensure that this mistake did not happen again in our community. I will say that our district manager is very new to our district, and the assistant district engineer for maintenance, today was his very first day on the job. We not only met here, but did a little tour of Ethan Allen, and I think the moment that they saw the area, they realized the mistake that had been made. It appears that the contractor had been working up and down East-West Highway 410 outside of the city and continued spraying once they got here. We will be receiving a letter that we can share with the public outlining what the work that we will be doing together to make sure this never happens again. So I just want to thank the city staff, and particularly our head of public works, who did immediately jump on this when we heard that SHA was spraying pesticides on Ethan Allen. The next thing I wanted to mention is that today, I spent much of my day at the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments board meeting. We took up issues of housing in the Metropolitan Washington area and the lack of housing, and looking at the estimates for what is to come online in terms of housing units. The estimates look like they're about 100,000 housing units short of what we are going to actually need in this region. And given the moratorium that I mentioned before on new homes in Montgomery County in our area, this is a serious concern. The City Council will be taking up where we left off a few months ago, discussing our strategic plan on affordable housing, and both of these things will obviously add context to those conversations. I will also say that the COG board today did pass a resolution directing the Planning Directors Technical Advisory Committee and the Housing Directors Committee, which are standing committees of COG, to assess the region's ability to accommodate the additional need for housing units and help think about a plan for our region. So there's more to come on that. I am grateful that the COG is taking up this issue, as we will also be discussing it, but not great news today. And I think that's it for me. I'll turn it over to the city manager for comments. Yeah. Yeah.
I forgot to mention.
Oh, stop, please.
I forgot to mention, I apologize, Old Town Takoma Business Association Community Cleanup Day is this Saturday, the 15th, from 10 to 2. If you meet up at that time under the clock, or actually at 4th and Blair Road. If you want to do it in DC or at Takoma Junction, any of those 3 places, they'll give you a garbage bag and gloves, and you can go around and pick up trash and cigarette butts and make the area look nice. So I should be out there. Maybe I'll see others. Thanks.
Great. Oh, and I did have one other thing I forgot to mention. The city of Golden, Colorado may pass 16 and 17-year-old voting. And the reason they're going to do it is because the mayor of Golden, Colorado was at a presentation that I gave in January at the mayor's innovation project and thought it was the best thing she had ever heard and brought it back to our colleagues. And so they're looking at, and hopefully in the next couple of days they will vote to become the next city to have 16 and 17-year-olds voting. So now I'll turn it over to the city manager.
Wonderful, wonderful. I have a number of items. I'll try to be quick. And as always, my city manager comments are posted on the website, both with the agenda and under the city manager page. I do have information that was put out as a blog today about planning for Hurricane Florence. At this point, it looks like if we get effects, it's going to be sometime like a week from now. But that doesn't stop the rain, as has been mentioned. I think the biggest issue, frankly, is not the impact of the storm. There may be a couple more inches of rain from the storm, but the fact that we're completely sodden. And we're at the situation, we're at the point where any little impact really has, affects many people. Trees can fall over, they can hit power lines. Do what you need to do because of climate change and really be prepared. Ready.gov online is one of the best locations to go for how to do that. Takoma Park is, of course, prepared. To do that, we've been doing regular inspections of our inlets to make sure that they're not clogged. We're placing some barricades in areas where there's been recent flooding in case we have to close off a street. So we're trying to be proactive for what might come, but everyone, of course, has to do their part as well. One thing that we will show on another day, but I'm really happy about, is that we have a new service for streaming our council meetings. Instead of using the Granicus system, we have moved to Open Media system. Open Media is an open source nonprofit organization with a focus on government transparency. We also get a grant from them as part of this process. So we're saving $12,000 per year by moving to them, and we have a better system. And so you can see this. We'll give some demonstrations on another date. It does allow for closed captioning and including translations into other languages on some of the platforms, and that's really helpful for our multilingual community. I wanted to bring up, we've talked about affordable housing a little bit from the COG meeting today, but one of the big issues here is that there is a building moratorium in our area. It affects the areas that serve, that go into the Blair High School and Northwood High School high schools, such that at least at this point, there's a moratorium applies to applications for preliminary plan of subdivision for residential properties, and it could apply to projects that may require only a site plan or building permit if it's involving 3 residential units. This does not apply to commercial properties at this point, commercial development projects. Nevertheless, it is a big deal. That's not happened here before. It's an automatic trigger because our schools are too full. And you know, I think that this has been something that our elected officials at the county level have not really dealt with before and don't know what to do because schools are expensive. But we also need to make sure that we have the housing available in areas with good transportation. Takoma Park's a key place for that. So I think this adds a lot more push to those discussions with the Board of Education and others about the needs to be creative, and Takoma Park is a great place to be creative in addressing both school and housing needs. So we've spent a good amount of time talking with folks, but we'll have a lot more to do, and we urge a lot of work on that. On LED streetlights, obviously there's been a hot topic. To shed some light on it, we have a blog. It's Okay, try my one little joke for the day. Our sustainability manager has posted a blog that tells a lot about our hope to move to LED streetlights. The next steps in the project are continuing the conversations with PEPCO to address questions that have been raised, including testing some lower wattage bulbs, making sure that the light level, though, is appropriate for the various either residential or commercial areas and the different needs that they have. The lights will not be of a blue color tone. That's something that's important to all. And so we're anticipating a discussion again with the council this fall after we see these lower wattage lights. I want to say that moving to the LED lights in Takoma Park provides a number of important benefits. It will have a positive environmental impact equal to what we would get by eliminating 912,000 miles driven by cars in a year. That's a major Takoma Park step related to climate change. That's just a huge number. It is not the same as me swapping out my lights in my house. This is a major step. The other important big item for me, looking at bottom lines, is that although we would be paying $112,000 for the actual transition, we will be saving $50,000 to $60,000 a year going forward by having this change. We increase public safety by installing more appropriate lighting levels because people walk, they want to cross streets safely, and we like to have people walking in our community. And we also move away from our current street lights, which are not dark sky certified. The lights go up into the night sky, they go into people's windows. These are more directed to the areas where people walk or drive. And so I think that there's so many benefits. Obviously, we'll work to get it right so it's comfortable, but it is something that is just a major step for Takoma Park, and I really encourage us to make that commitment. Completely different topic. Some people have noticed that there's an outdoor dining option that's different with Takoma Beverage Company on Laurel Avenue. We have a new outdoor cafe permit based on the resolution and ordinance that was passed by the council this past summer. The new permit allows businesses to offer outdoor seating to patrons, and it allows use of the city's right-of-way, which can include on-street parking spaces, which does in this case with Takoma Bevco. It requires the business to submit a site plan illustrating how the outdoor cafe will be laid out, provides liability coverage, it's in full compliance with all food and beverage requirements. There's other permit conditions. Permits can be for 3 months, 6 months, or 12-month periods. And staff will be monitoring these outdoor locations to ensure that there's clear passage for patrons past the cafe, and that our local laws, such as the polystyrene ordinance, property maintenance codes, et cetera, are met. Information about the outdoor cafe permit and process is now online on a separate page on our website. So we provided a link here for that. Yes?
Do you know the length of their permit?
I don't know for Takoma Bevco.
If you could check later, just let me know. That'd be great. Thank you.
Councilmember Kovar mentioned waiting lists to get into the after-school programs. We have huge waiting lists also for our senior programs. I love the fact that our recreation department is popular and well-respected, but within just a few hours, 80% of the department's classes for seniors were full, and we now have 13 of the 19 programs with waiting lists for our seniors. So space is an issue. Staffing is something that comes with that we have to provide for. We're going to look at ways as we go into the budget about trying to meet some of these needs. And I guess it's a good problem to have, but I really do have sympathy for the various folks who are on the waiting list, because it's, space is a real issue. We have the 2017 election report available online, so it's got interesting information, so we're letting people know about that. Just a couple fun notes. Our housing and community development staff did a community service project at Food and Friends on September 6th, and they helped package assemble meals and groceries. I think they're happy about the fact that there's photos in here with their hairnets. So, but they found it as a good team building exercise, but really felt like they were contributing to the community. It was a nice thing to do. We've got some information on our next round of our We Are Takoma cultural series. You know, we have some wonderful programs coming up. People need to look at what's online, both with our films coming in, our music programs, and some of the book programs at the library have been just tremendous. So really hitting issues on populations that are near and dear to our hearts and really are part of our community. So I urge people to check out the programs. We also have a Yarn Bomb public art project up at Takoma Langley. It's a big caterpillar. People can go look at it. It's pretty neat because it goes a long ways. But I appreciate the fact that we keep art as part of the way to survive in our community. And I have a note here about, we had some positive feedback about the bike stations that we have in our community. People who ride bikes sometimes do need a little bit of extra air in their tires or some adjustments made, and we've got locations for that. I want to give kudos to Captain Ty Collington. He received the Exceptional Police Performance Award this week at the Maryland Chief of Police Annual Conference. The award is conferred upon a police officer who has made outstanding contributions towards keeping the community safe by performing an exceptional amount and/or quality of police activity, developing and implementing effective policing strategies or tactics, or conducting a skillful and tenacious investigation of a complex and difficult case. And we really appreciate his service. I was glad to see the announcements go out. We're advertising for a deputy police chief, a communications specialist to fill our media specialist position, our economic development manager position, and a number of other positions. We urge people to go to the careers page on the city website to apply for these positions. And just noting that September 22nd to the 26th, the Deputy City Manager and I will be in Baltimore with the International City County Management Association Convention. And we'll be doing hosting duties as well as attending the different sessions. So, two other quick notes that are not on here. On Flower Avenue, I'll get you a more up-to-date information, but because of the way the slow moving through the legal process at State Highway and other steps, I don't believe construction is going to be able to start till spring. We'll try to get that information, but it's mid-September. And then you have to have award the contract, although all of the T's have been crossed, and have the meetings about how do you gear up for this, because obviously this is going to be a complex project and so many residents right there. But I think that's the part of the message is we're looking at a spring construction at this point. Yeah, there's some details that we can share. One other thing that I just want to mention, I referenced this a little bit last week about the various plans that give us direction. For Dorothy's Woods and a number of the other kinds of areas, it is helpful that we have an open space plan being prepared and updated and that kind of thing. That also helps not necessarily have to make decisions at the last minute on something, but also to feel and understand that approach. So that will be coming to you for discussion. It's a great place to try to consider and balance the various needs across the community about open space and use of the various public areas that we have. So we had some information on that before, but the real open space plan's not before you yet, and I think it'll be useful as we move forward. Thank you.
Terrific. Any other questions for the city manager? All right, seeing none, thank you for a very detailed report this evening. Just as a reminder for folks, the city manager comments are put up on the website with the agenda for this evening if you want to go back and look at information or the pictures of the staff in hairnets. All right, we will start with our work session now. Our first is a discussion of traffic calming for the 700 block of Houston Avenue, and I think our,
Thank you.
thank you, have a nice evening. I'm going to welcome our Public Works Director.
Thank you for coming.
Hi. I thought residents might stick around. I don't have a whole lot to add that's not already in the cover page. The residents of Houston Avenue approached the city over a year ago, I believe, summertime a year ago, with concerns about the narrowness of the street, the speed of traffic, the volume of traffic on the roads, and we had a meeting to basically discuss what the options were in terms of the city's existing traffic calming requests. So the residents on the street that we met with worked among themselves to circulate a petition. There was some confusion as to what sufficed in terms of how far down to go. There was an interest in doing something in both the 600 block and the 700 block. In the end, the petition signatures that were gathered just made it eligible to do something in the 700 block. They collected signatures between Brighton Avenue and Flower Avenue on Houston. So that enabled consideration to take place for traffic calming on the 700 block. There's been comments this evening, and I wholeheartedly agree with them. However, the issue of a more holistic approach is definitely a goal. Some of you may remember several years ago, the planning office embarked on a holistic approach to traffic calming and solicited neighborhoods to submit their neighborhood as one that would like to engage in a holistic traffic calming approach. There were 3 neighborhoods that were selected. New Hampshire Gardens was one, Long Branch Sligo was the other, and Pinecrest, I believe, was the third. Those processes were long, sadly vicious at times, and really, really difficult because, unfortunately, we do all tend to look at things through our own particular point of view. So it's very hard when you're balancing the needs of one street and another, and understanding that, yes, we have more traffic on our street than your street, so a solution might be to split it more evenly between the two. The street that has less doesn't necessarily welcome the opportunity to share traffic with the street that has more. There's also different points of view about inconvenience. For some people, the idea of a one-way street is an inconvenience that just adds one more thing to their day that just puts it over the top. So it's very, very difficult to have a holistic approach. That's not to say it shouldn't be tried. The policy that we currently have in place really limits itself to a block-by-block type approach unless we have neighborhoods that are willing to jump in and work together. On the holistic approach that the planning office worked on, there did end up being two of the 3 projects that were able to move forward. However, again, because when you get into a group mentality with multiple streets and multiple interests, you end up kind of going down to the lowest common denominator. So in terms of innovation, in terms of, really thinking outside the box, it ends up being very difficult for neighborhoods in a whole way to start talking about things like one-way streets and turn restrictions. I just recently spent some time over in Riverdale Park, and I was amazed. They have little segmented neighborhoods that you can't get out of other than the way you came in. So a really radical approach to traffic calming is to block the roads. So you go in, you can drive around on those streets, but you can only get out one way, and you can't connect from one neighbor to the next.
Gated?
No, they just stop. They literally stop.
It's very restricted.
I imagine, the negative of that, of course, is the lack of community. They did have some great walking paths and bike paths, so there's pedestrian routes through those neighborhoods, but as far as car routes, so it was a very novel approach. I don't know if it was designed that way or just happened that way, but my point being that oftentimes when you're doing a holistic approach, you end up kind of really getting down to the more basic. We ended up with speed humps.
Speed humps and stop signs end up being the major things.
That being said, on to the specifics of Houston Avenue. I think there was an interest in both a speed hump on the block as well as an interest in a one-way street. Were we able to circulate the traffic counts?
Yes, we got them out kind of late, but we do have that information.
I just wanted to summarize. It was, it's always interesting to get this data. It was just a 1 week period, so, 1 week period in October. So it was during the school year, during a non-cold month. I think it's pretty reflective and a pretty, I think that data can be looked at pretty, with some high degree of confidence. It did show that the 700 block of Houston had more cars per day than the other streets that were evaluated, which were Kennebec and Hudson, and then also the 600 block of Houston. The increased cars were, max 200 cars more a day than the other streets. So not a huge addition, but definitely a higher volume. In terms of speeding, we found that about 5% of the cars driving on that block in the 700 block were speeding. Also in the 600 block, 5%. Of more interest is on Kennebec. The speeding rate went up to 12 to 14% of the cars going in either direction were speeding. That's probably a reflection of the width of the street. It is slightly wider. On Houston Avenue, you can't really speed unless there's nobody there because you're meeting other cars and going back and forth. They have on-street parking on one side, so it makes it difficult to get up to any length of speed. So that's kind of the hard numbers of what we have there. In terms of a staff recommendation, we really don't have one from the department's perspective. The process has always been a neighborhood-driven process, so we want to make sure that it qualifies, that the petitions, were the correct number. The street does have the space to have a speed hump located within it and meet our conditions in terms of the distance between stop signs and distance between other speed humps. And so in those ways, the request for a speed hump meets the criteria that the city's established by code and by recommendation. The one-way street, it would certainly be an effective way to limit the issue of competing oncoming traffic that they have on the street. It would create some inconvenience and would obviously push those cars that would otherwise be going the second way on that street to the neighboring streets. And we would have to work with both the school system and the bus system to accommodate that one-way traffic because it would no longer allow those activities in two-way.
The other thing about one-way streets is people tend to drive faster on one-way streets. So, I think that was part of the reason they wanted the speed hump because they wanted to do one way and then people would drive faster. So, I think that was part of their discussion.
I'm sorry, can I just clarify? So what were the one-way, what's the hope for having it one way?
I think,
is the volume?
Well, I think the problem is largely because of cars coming in both directions, and if a car's parked, they can't get around, and so it requires somebody to back up.
And buses are bigger.
And buses,
there's buses on this street and not on the other streets.
There is also lots of evidence of cars hopping the curb to get around each other, so people will drive up on someone's yard to get around a car.
So you can see the mud tracks on people's grass.
We did work with a couple of residents on the street and gave them boulders, which is our go-to traffic calming measure. So we lined up some boulders on somebody's yard. They were quite excited about it. So I haven't gone back since then to see if the tracks still remain, but if they did, they'd probably stop at the start.
I think the other thing, I think that this is, the way that the system is a very pro forma kind of petition-driven process. We do require a community meeting. There wasn't a lot of community discussion before this. One of the things that I think is a little bit of a problem is that we don't really have good directions, I think, in our regs about when the community meeting happens because there wasn't a lot of time between the notice given and the actual meeting. And so that's, I think it, in some respects, that made it so they didn't have a very good discussion among themselves about what might be the effects of this and how do they want to deal with it.
the best option is if they can agree to something. Other than the fact that we would just need to work with them in either way. I personally don't like one-way streets if I can help it, but that's just my preference.
And there's parking on both sides?
Just one
Just one
side.
side, okay, that's okay.
There's only a sidewalk on one side.
And there's only a sidewalk on one side. Councilmember Smith?
Thank you, Ms. Braithwaite, for working on this. This started last year. The first meeting happened at Donald's home.
Right.
I wasn't able to attend. I was at the NLC conference, but this has been a problem street for a long time. I mean, it's not wide enough to have major buses, school buses, and cars trying to get through this little area. Houston Avenue that fronts Flower Avenue. I understand that other residents, like on Roanoke and Kennebec, and are concerned. One problem I think that exacerbated the situation is the change in what part of Houston Avenue was going to be one way. Initially, it started out just being the 700 block, and then some of the residents on the 700 block thought, oh, well, maybe we could have it all of Houston Avenue. So that changed the requirements. So residents that were on Kennebec didn't know about it. And
the other thing is the issue that we bring up a number of times about our process, and that is there's some very large multifamily buildings on the street that, because the way our process works, aren't really involved. And so the kind of thing that would look, when you look holistically, even if you just look holistically on Houston, we're not having that discussion because it's very hard to talk to the folks that live in the apartment buildings.
You're exactly right. Donald and his wife did make an attempt to talk to residents in Winslow and the Cambridge. They got access to the building, so they actually knocked on residents' doors, which I appreciate. But, this is really tough because there isn't a staff recommendation. I don't know if a speed hump would be adequate. I don't know if we should consider having the buses take a different route. I don't know if that would alleviate some of the problems.
Well, one of the things we see is that speeding at 5% is not a significant issue, though, any speeding car is a concern if it makes you feel endangered, but, doesn't raise it to the level of a big problem on the street. I think volume is probably the bigger issue and the difficulty in passing. We offered at the meeting, I don't know if we've taken any concrete steps towards that, to talk to the school system about rerouting buses. We could also talk to Ride-On about rerouting buses. The street itself is one that I don't know why they've selected it as I guess because of the apartment buildings and the access to that, it makes it unideal from that perspective. But once you get up to the 700 block, the road is so narrow that it makes it hard to traverse. It also makes it hard to turn on Roanoke, so you're kind of stuck. What are you going to do? So it's a challenging location.
I mean, theoretically, if we did do a comprehensive traffic calming approach, what other things could we do on these other streets like Roanoke and Kennebec to modulate some of this volume?
Given the limited width of the street and the limited width of the right-of-way, I think you're really looking at one-way streets and turn restrictions and limiting access or time of access to reduce the volume and address some of the congestion.
So could limiting the time of access give some type of relief for that 700 block of Houston Avenue?
Potentially. One of the things we don't have from the traffic study is where the volumes of traffic were the highest. We just have a full day count. So we could ask them to go back and take a look at it in a timestamp kind of a way and see. I mean, typically those are either morning rush or evening rush, depending on which is determined to have the bigger problem.
I would be interested in seeing that data. I mean, the residents deserve something, right? They went through the process. They've, crossed all the T's, dotted the I's. I don't think it's fair to them to just say we can't do anything when we do have the power to do something. It may not be something that everybody appreciates, but we should do something for them. So if we could, maybe consider, the street being one way at a certain time of the day, or.
I guess in terms of a recommendation, my preference would be to try for, maybe you could help coordinate another meeting that would involve the residents on the adjacent streets, with the bus company reps from the school district and from Right On, because to me, I think that ends up really directing the possibilities of answers. It may be that they can't go on another street for some reason, or they might say, either one of these is fine. And so that adds a lot of information, I think, as to what's the solution here. I mean, all of those streets are not great streets.
Right.
They're very small, and none of them are straight. Mm-hmm. So, to me, I would really hesitate just saying we'll do something, other than speed humps, which are a pretty standard kind of answer. Anything else really, I think, has to involve the bus companies.
Okay, so is Braithwaite lead that putting together the
I
meeting?
think that unfortunately, I think we have to do that. I mean, it's not like we have something else to do.
Okay, all right.
But I think just that ends up being, I think, really the only answer. That to me is the only step that would give us anything more that might provide a direction.
Okay.
Other than that, I don't know that we have a lot that we can do here.
Okay, and so you think we could do it in 30 days, 60 days?
I have no idea.
Okay.
We'll certainly reach out to our contacts, both Right On and the school MCPS, and find out
Okay.
when they might be available
All right.
to have that
Thank you.
conversation.
And I just had a follow-up question. If we were to put in a speed hump here, and given the size of the street and everything, that would make it even less hospitable for probably a ride-on or a school bus, correct? Or
I think it's the lousy place.
Right.
I think they're there for the kids
Mhm.
and the riders. I personally think the Route 25 is a strange route and needs to be rethought altogether. But but for the school buses, it's because that's where the kids are.
all right, so I think the item on the table then as to move forward with this is to hold on the request for the one-way street and installing the speed hump until we can have conversations with Right On, MCPS, and further conversations with residents in the neighborhood and collecting the further data you asked for. Councilwoman DeBala, did you?
Yeah, I've been looking at the map, and there may be some reasons having to do with the steepness of some of the blocks about why the buses go the way they do. But my bigger question is, now we're about to go across the creek and talk about Hilltop and Geneva, and somebody said what happens over there could affect what's across the creek, and I'm not necessarily myself seeing it from the map, but I'd like your opinion. Can they be considered separately, or because of the Maple Avenue Bridge being right in the middle there, do they interact with each other? If you
I
put
think they
speed bumps in
function
here.
fairly separately.
Mhm.
I
Just
yeah.
wanted to get an answer to that since somebody raised it.
People have said that it made an impact. I don't believe it's a very large impact because it's a relatively restricted way to cross Sligo Creek.
Oh yeah, it is.
The one area that I think is an important remark, though, has to do with the limited entry time onto Hillside,
Yeah,
which
that's a good point.
gets, unless we
Yeah.
have a cop car sitting there, does get violated on a regular basis. And so those tend not to work very well. But I don't think we have to think of these two proposals together.
Councilwoman Costick?
Thank you. Were you finished?
Yeah.
Oh. I just kind of wanted to comment on some of this generally, and I appreciate the fact that residents brought up the issues with this policy, and it's something that we've been talking about for a while. When I was on the Safe Roadways Committee about a year ago, we brought recommendations to the council to review our traffic calming policy and make some changes, moving away from speed bumps and broadening out to allow for a better process for multifamily units and more of a holistic approach overall. Just our discussion tonight really impresses upon me how ineffective our policy is. And I think part of that aspect is that we need to move towards something more holistic, that where we're looking at the impact of putting traffic calming on X street, what is that doing on the next street over, as well as one-way streets. But I also think, I don't think a holistic approach has to be people within neighborhoods talking to each other, figuring out, we're gonna take more traffic, or you're gonna take more traffic, or where's the traffic gonna go? I think we need to move towards something that is data focused, where we have you at Public Works, where people who are experts on traffic calming telling us what we need on this street to reduce traffic. Because a policy where I, as a resident who knows very little about traffic engineering or traffic flow, says, I want a speed hump here, and somebody 2 streets over says, I want a stop sign, or I want a chicane, or I want whatever. To me, that just doesn't make any sense, because you end up having disparities across streets, and you might have ineffective methods that are requested by residents because that's all they really know to request. So I know we've talked about this before, and I think if there are ways that we can explore using the data like this, throughout the city. I know there was recently a collection of data on Psycho Mill Road in Ward 3, and we got that data back, but it's hard to look at that on its own. And I think if there's a way that we can take that and put it together with some of this information and information that is being collected on other roads throughout the city, we would have a better picture of where the traffic is to begin with, and what the speeds are, and maybe what warrants traffic calming overall. And it might be that a street like Houston needs traffic calming, or a street like Kennebec needs traffic calming, but it's hard to say when we have such limited information. And I think it's also hard to say what is the threshold that gives something priority, because maybe there's a street 5 blocks away that has way bigger volumes or way greater problems with speeding, and we just don't hear from those residents, so we don't end up with traffic calming there. So do you have thoughts on how we, and it might not be right now, we can work on this on a long-term basis, and that's one of our priorities that we that I wanted to add to our list this year, was to look at this policy. But do you have thoughts on how we can move away from this just being residents say they want traffic calming, and they say they want a speed bump, so we put in a speed bump, to we as a city have identified priority areas where there is a real issue above and beyond the other streets in the city, and those are the places we're going to dedicate our limited funds first, and then we're going to kind of go down the line. And there still could be a place for requests from people, but we would have more of a data-oriented priority process.
Well, 2 thoughts. One is to move towards that overall evaluation of the city would take a pretty large effort on the part of our police department and our traffic officers, as well as the city engineer, to sort of just gather the data in general. It'd probably be something far beyond what we could do in a reasonable length of time. You know, if we did it hodgepodge, a couple of streets a month, it would take a while to get there. So if we were really looking at that, we'd probably want to bring in an engineering firm to do a citywide traffic count and set up some parameters. We want 7-day counts during the school year, and we want to sort of see what we have volume-wise and what we have percentage speed violation-wise, and just see what that data shows, and then we could probably do a heat map type approach where you sort of show where are the areas of the city that have high volumes and what is high volume. There will also need to be some distinction between the width of the road and the volume, because what you tend to see is that the speed of traffic, the speed of traffic on a street really reflects what the street can handle. So people drive what the street is designed to hold. It's one of the things that traffic engineers say all the time. You can't just put a sign up and lower the speed limit because of miles an hour, because you can, it's comfortable. If the design of the road is one that you can't drive more than 25 miles an hour because of turns and sight distances, the cars are just going to naturally, we're conditioned creatures. But anyways, kind of get off the point, but we could take a look at an approach like that where you sort of evaluate the citywide traffic volumes, traffic speeds, and then have a database from which to work from. I have no idea what that kind of thing would cost or the length of time it would take. I think it would require resources outside of ours, to gather that type of information. The first time we did traffic counts, it'll be interesting to compare, is 2007 when we did our pavement condition index. It was the first time that engineering firm, we asked them to give us volumes of traffic on a street. That was the first time we had a citywide list of traffic volumes by street. At that point in time, Erskine Street was the most heavily trafficked street that wasn't a state highway. So that was kind of didn't know that. So I imagine if we did that kind of thing, we'd find that same thing. We'd identify those streets with high volumes. There was another thought I had relative to your comment. I just want to say quickly, this is the first time we've actually done counts associated with traffic calming requests. It's not part of the process, but given the interest in the comments of the Safe Roadways Committee, we've tried to incorporate it, and the police department has equipment that allows us to do that. So this is the first time we've had that kind of data. Prior to this, we've made those decisions in a vacuum of no information about volumes, no information about speeds, just perspectives of the residents that live there. So, small steps, but it is a step in the right direction. I appreciate your comments.
I think the idea of some heat maps and that kind of stuff would be very interesting. There's a converse. There's a converse of things, which is that we're also needing to look at how changes in vehicles mean that we arrange ourselves differently. With Uber, Lyft, and autonomous vehicles, we need to have a lot more curb space for them to drop off and pick up, and how does that work with handicapped residents, and how does that intersect with bike lanes, and how do we, and where do the bus stops go with that? So I've already raised this to my staff that this is a great project that we need to be thinking about. We're not at the point that we can do it this fiscal year. But I think that I really think we're at the point where a whole fresh look at this is appropriate and is the right thing we have to do. So it may not be able to address Houston. We may need to do the best we can for these projects, but I think there is a whole different holistic approach that not only for traffic calming, but just how we're going to be using rights of way in a different way. How we walk down the sidewalk with robots. I mean, it's not far away, and we need to prepare for that and maybe direct it the way we want it to go. So.
Yeah, I would add that I think the sidewalk request policy is another one that should be incorporated into that, so we're looking at where sidewalks need to go as well. Yeah, I would like to see us move in that direction, and maybe that's something we could look at in the coming budget year, if we could collect some information about what that would involve and what the cost would be. Yeah. In the meantime, if there's a way to at least collect the data that we're getting from these various traffic counts that we're doing, I think if we can just collect those and have them housed somewhere together, I don't know if there's a way to easily dump them into a spreadsheet together, but if there is, great. If not, we can just put them somewhere together. But so at least we have those things as we're doing the research, we can collect that data together. I think that would be useful.
Councilwoman Searcy?
I just want to piggyback off of Councilmember Cossack's point of taking a more holistic view and actually identifying areas within the city to prioritize in terms of having more community or area level views and counts. With things like the Purple Line that are going to impact a large segment of the community, I mean, we're making a lot of assumptions about the behavior around people who may be taking advantage of something like the Purple Line. We're assuming they're going to take a bus or they're going to walk to get on the streetcars. We're not assuming that people may actually drive and park in areas in the community in order to access this mode of transportation. And so I think it is important for us to, recognizing the financial limitations that we have, but if we have the ability to devote some resources towards taking a more holistic view, I would advocate for those areas that would be highly impacted by the Purple Line as a place to start. To not only determine about speeding, but to also try to get a gauge for whether or not there will be needs for, parking restrictions and things like that. If you already have a lot of cars cutting through and you already have a lot of residents parked on the street, something like the Purple Line could or major, when the construction actually starts, will only exacerbate that. So definitely think that it's something important for us to do. And although we may not have the ability to do citywide assessments, prioritizing those areas that would be highly impacted by the Purple Line would be a place to start.
Great, got enough there? Okay, I think we're going to move on now to the next traffic calming request. This was on Hilltop between Geneva Avenue and Mississippi Avenue. And this was for, they were requesting a speed hump here. I don't know if you had any
This
thoughts
request
on this
was
one?
for addition of a speed hump between Geneva and Mississippi Avenue on Hilltop Road. There is currently a speed hump located where Mississippi Avenue and Hilltop connect just slightly south of that. So there is an existing speed hump. There's also a crosswalk at Geneva and Hilltop. Those were changes that were made from a prior traffic calming request that was done a few years ago. So this is supplemental to that. Do you all have the traffic counts that were done for this particular? Nope. It's one page. As Ruthie Bushnell had mentioned, cars are flying, and you take a look at the data, and yes, indeed, cars are. We do have a speeding issue on Hilltop Road. This came as a bit of a surprise. Almost 50% of the cars are driving over the speed limit on Hilltop. 52% in the eastbound direction, 41% in the westbound direction. The amount over the speed is the 85th percentile is about 28 or 29 miles an hour. So just slightly. I mean, they're not going 50 miles an hour, but they are going over the speed limit of 25. So cars are almost half the time speeding on that street. We don't have a way of gauging the violators at the stop sign, but that's another thing that the residents report, that people blow through the stop sign. I think you've heard me have this conversation before, which is somewhat contradictory, but when you put stop signs on streets that don't warrant stop signs based on engineering practices, and engineering practice says you only put a stop sign on intersecting streets when they have fairly equal volumes of traffic coming, so that that's the reason you have the stop sign. When you have streets where there's a high priority of traffic one direction, hardly anybody ever come in the other direction, and you put a stop sign there, it's basically our learned response to ignore them. People hover their foot over the brake, and if they don't see anybody, they keep going. So Geneva and Hilltop is an example of that. We installed stop signs in an intersection that doesn't warrant it by traffic engineering standards, and it's not really a surprise that there's a lot of violation of the stop sign. However, there were some improvements made. We had a very robust community meeting that Terry and I and Michelle Holmes from the police department attended. We were really, it was remarkable, people's level of interest and discussion. There really seemed to be a focus on trying to figure things out from a broader perspective. One of the things we did after, we said once we get the base count, one of the things that I had agreed to do was paint the lane edge and the center line on Hilltop, which is something that if it ever stops raining, we will paint the center line to the edge on Hilltop. That again is a cosmetic measure, but it sometimes will tend to give a visual cue to drivers if you paint the lines narrow. Drivers will, for the most part, tend to drive a little slower. It also helps with people, oftentimes on Hilltop, will drive in the middle of the road, not realizing or not thinking it's two-way traffic. So we have not yet installed those pavement markings and refreshed the stop bars. That's something that we intend to do regardless of the council's action on the speed hump request. The neighborhood had also asked for another stop sign at the Mississippi Hilltop intersection. We've got a kind of a unique situation there. Hilltop entering from Montgomery County has a stop sign at the Mississippi. Mississippi's kind of like a Y intersection onto Hilltop. So there's a stop sign as you're going southbound from Montgomery County into Takoma Park at Mississippi. There's a stop sign on Mississippi as you're intersecting with Hilltop. But if you're going the opposite direction on Hilltop, because it's a Y intersection, there is no stop sign for the cars that are proceeding in a straight line up Hilltop. So there was a request for that stop sign. I discussed that with Susie. As far as our perspective on that, it would be another intersection where the stop sign wasn't warranted based on the engineering design of that intersection. If you have a straight road with no intersecting traffic, to put a stop sign there, we worry that it's really an invitation to ignore the stop sign and to confuse people who don't understand where they're basically stopping in what looks like a straight line of a street. So it was our recommendation not to pursue the stop sign there. However, as I mentioned, we do want to do the pavement marking and stop bar enhancement. So this request is for an additional speed hump between Mississippi and Geneva on that road. In this summer, we've had some extensive flooding along Hilltop Road, so that's another area of concern. It's at a low point with sloped lots beyond it, and we have had situations where almost the entire roadway was filled with water, mud, and debris. We've used our backhoe to shovel it out a couple of times. I don't know what that means other than we're having a heck of a lot of rain and it's destabilizing soils. You put a speed hump in the mix of that, just makes it a little more of a mess. But at any rate, it's a fairly short block between Geneva and Mississippi. It's a slight curve to the stop sign, and the request is for a speed hump in that location. In this incidence, given the number of drivers that are driving over the speed limit, I think it would be more of our inclination to, speed humps do tend to slow drivers in a limited fashion, and this would be an area where it might be warranted due to the high percentage of speeding cars.
Were there any other traffic calming measures explored other than the speed hump?
No. Again, on that roadway, it's about a 26-foot wide road. It's a slight curve. Mm-hmm. You have the parking areas for park and plantings, for Sligo Creek Park and the trail. Not really an opportunity. There is no parking on the street, so not really an opportunity for bump outs or chicanes or anything else. There is no curb line on the street, which is something I think the next time we pave that road, given the flooding situation and mud problems we're having, we probably will put a curb in to address some of that. We did some stormwater improvements there in a partnership project with Park and Planning recently to address one of the parking areas and enhance the stormwater inlet to try to address some of the runoff.
Councilmember Siemens?
Thank you, Mayor. And, thank you for all your work on this. I know that you've been busy not just with that meeting, but with all of the work that came out of that meeting. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was, as you said, surprised to see the amount of speeding going on there, but we should have been surprised because that's what the neighbors were telling us when we had the meeting. You look at some of these speeds, I mean, like the top end of those speeds are, 40 miles an hour coming down through there. It's pretty fast for a road like that, let alone that they're probably blowing the intersection too with the stop sign. I wondered if these counts have been shared with the police department?
The police
Yeah.
department generated them. They came from the police
Okay.
department.
Okay, do you know if they've actually begun any enforcement there, either with the speed or with the
I know that
restrictions,
after the
entry
meeting,
restrictions?
yeah, the traffic control office was doing turn restriction, if you swing through the turn restriction. We also, they also moved the sign message board onto the street for a couple of weeks in between 4th of July and the start of school. You know, basically saying slow down. So that those have been the major, I don't know, I did talk with Michelle earlier today, but I didn't ask if she had any data on enforcement.
Yeah, I was going to say that would be informative if we could get a report on the enforcement there, whatever type of enforcement they're doing, and kind of what the results were of that enforcement. If they
I'll
could
find
give
out.
tickets.
And I do think that given the beginning of school, they kind of focused a little bit elsewhere for the last few weeks, but that's just my gut feeling. I'd have to ask them to find out.
That's fine, even if it hasn't been done, if we could
I'll let you know.
do some and get the reports on, it'd be
Sure.
helpful. All right, and then you mentioned the painting. I'm glad to hear that you're continuing, plans to do that. Hopefully, we don't have to wait till spring to have that happen, but it sure has been rainy recently. One of the concerns that was brought to us tonight was the proximity of another speed hump in that area, and some concern about whether it was feasible to put in another speed hump. How have you, I assume you evaluated that?
Yeah, the regulations, I think, have a recommended distance of at least 150 feet between speed humps. We have that distance that it would be at least 150 feet from the existing speed hump.
How close would it be to the stop sign that they're not stopping at?
I would need to look again. We did tape it out, but I didn't bring that information, but I could send that to you tomorrow. I think it was at least 75 feet beyond that to the stop sign. I think our regulations or our recommendations are at least 100 feet from stop signs.
Okay. All right, thank you. I'm just going down my list here. Bear with me. Yeah, the erosion was another thing that, that was kind of the first problem that was brought to us. And I know you've done some work on that to clean up, but is there anything that we can do to minimize the erosion in the future?
Yeah, it's all private property, coming from the residences on the hillside slope. There isn't any contribution that we've been able to find from roadways or right-of-ways, so it's basically runoff.
Yeah, but I think as we understand it, that water problems on your property are my problem when they get to my property. In this case, since it's our roadway, is there anything we can do to divert that water?
We haven't really done an analysis of where the water's coming from, whether it's rooftops or stream valleys or whatever it is. There is an existing obvious stream valley that exists along the main source of some of the mud. So there is a historic stream valley there that has been eroding. It's all on private property. We haven't walked it or evaluated it. To address that kind of thing, you basically need to do a stream stabilization project, which would include planting, rocks, topography, basically try to hold down the soils. And
if it's not too inconvenient, it would be helpful, I think, for the residents if I could get a copy of the easements in that area, with a map.
There aren't any that I'm aware of, but I can certainly check again with the county's GIS data to find out.
I appreciate that. Beyond that, I certainly support the will of the residents. I think we have a petition that meets the requirements for the installation of the speed hump there. They probably would benefit most from a historic Maple Avenue speed hump. But I know that's not in the.
We weren't doing those anymore. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, seeing no other comments at this time on this one, we'll have this one move forward for a vote coming up in future weeks, and we'll move forward with other exploration of the other traffic calming that came before us this evening. Now we'll move to our last item tonight, which is an update on Takoma Park Recreation Center, next steps. And unfortunately, I was informed that we don't have the ability to show slides tonight. Is that right?
That's right. We don't have that, but I think the information is sufficient within the package that you can look at. I was just looking for my other. I have one other piece of paper. So the Takoma Park Rec Center property at 7315 New Hampshire Avenue, it's owned by Maryland National Capital Park and Planning Commission. It was built just like many other rec centers. There's ones in Prince George's County that are identical in design to this one. But the Montgomery County Maryland National Park and Planning Commission no longer wishes to maintain the facility. They're interested in trading the property for a piece of city-owned property, which is in the Long Branch Creek Stream Valley Park that the city owns, and it would be contiguous to other park and planning property that they have. For a number of years, we've had discussions about whether or not the city should assume responsibility for the rec center. We operate programs out of there. We do small maintenance, but larger maintenance has been done by Park and Planning. There have been discussions about how to continue to provide recreational services to residents on the eastern side of the city, and the extent to which the city could use the property to help meet other city priorities. And one of the most common that is talked about is affordable housing. In 2015, the city contracted for and received reports on recreation and facility options related to the rec center, and we had a number of community meetings, and we did visioning, and we had studies on the rec center design and how it might be able to be modified for kind of more modern rec center use. And we also had some information on the zoning analysis of the property and concept plans related to possible reuse of the property for other ways. And this is along New Hampshire Avenue, so how does this fit into the New Hampshire Avenue corridor? How does this, there are strange restrictions on the property in terms of a wooded area. There's a problem that there's not direct access from New Hampshire Avenue onto the city's onto the park and planning property, so that the driveway that's at Murwood that goes into the Takoma Overlook Hampshire Tower property is the one that is used as the access to the recreation center. We wanted to, all of these were strange restrictions to the property, and we didn't know then if there would be developer type interest in doing something with it given these kinds of restrictions. In 2017, a solicitation was issued for letters of interest from entities who might be interested in partnering with the city to do the community process that would really identify how to move forward. And council and we kind of stalled on that. We didn't move forward immediately for several reasons. One was the responses from the entities were very different in the level of information. Some met the requirements that we asked for, some went way beyond the requirements that we had asked for. It was also a time where the council elections were coming up, and there were these technical questions about the property and how might a land swap happen that kind of left a lot of confusion. And so we kind of postponed things. But what staff asked at that time was that we be able to continue to pursue, at least immediately, what would be involved in a land transfer. And in particular, the questions that were looked at were, if the city were to take over the property would we be burdened with enormous maintenance costs? Would there be some major infrastructure issue that all of a sudden would be on our shoulders? Another question was, would there be a way to actually have access to the property? Another question was, would Montgomery County be a partner in this financially? Because one of the things, we receive like, what, $82,000, $85,000 a year from Montgomery County that's supposed to pay for the operations of the programming. It in no way covers the amount of costs that we put. So we're subsidizing the county rec services by our work at this facility. And so I had a number of conversations. We had staff coordinated meetings with Park and Planning, and quite a lot of work has now been done. We've had surveys of the property, of the two properties. We've had appraisals done of the properties. There have been discussions with the Takoma Overlook Condominium Association about would they be amenable to an easement arrangement to allow access to the property. At this point, it sounds like there isn't a problem with that, but there's a process to go through with that. There have been some inquiries made by Park and Planning staff about that. Really nicely, inspections were done of the property and showed that there's not significant costs pending from the various infrastructure systems in the building and of the building. So for the next several years, we don't see something that they need to fix now because it's ready to break. We had our facilities folks go through along with the inspector to double check that. And so from the information that we've gotten to this point, I feel pretty comfortable that it's not going to be a financial headache for several years. To just kind of keep it, fix it a little bit, whatever, but I don't think there's something that, there's not something that caused me concern about taking on the property. One of the things that we have talked about when we've talked to Park and Planning is how would a transfer of land take place. And basically, the city has to submit kind of a letter of interest or request to the commission, Park and Planning Commission, that we would like to do this land transfer. Park and Planning Commission then would need to take that up as an action. You would need to take up the action for our purposes. And then the goal at this point, and it seems workable, is to have an effective date of July 1, 2019. So with the new budget year, we would then have that land swap be effective. At this point, I feel pretty good about the land swap. I wasn't sure how these discussions might go. There's questions sometimes that are raised about the differing valuations of the two properties. I mean, one's got a building on it, one doesn't. But that seems to be solvable because Park and Planning is very interested in having connected stream valleys in its control. That's an important thing in their way that they look at things. Part of this discussion is that also I think people feel comfortable that the city isn't just trying to run away from recreation services and providing facilities for the residents. And clearly, we've not had discussions that say we're just going to give up on providing services in this part of the town. How that actually gets handled has to still be a community discussion. It still has to be a discussion about the facility, about adjacent properties, and a variety of other things. But it seems workable. And I guess we didn't know that when we were having these discussions before. Like I said, some of the legal issues, like the
easement arrangement to actually get to the property seems pretty decent. I know that obviously there's Friends of the New Hampshire Avenue Rec Center, which is not an official city committee. It's a committee of interested people. Really want to see this facility be nice. They want to have a variety of people served by this facility, and there's significant interest, I think varied interest, but significant interest in maybe meeting affordable housing or other kind of needs with this facility. There's a whole process we've got to go through to get there. And I know that there's some anxiety that we're not there yet. But I think that's provided the council through your discussion tonight and in any other discussions you need to have, provided that you're comfortable with the land swap, I think we can go ahead and move forward on that, just as we're concurrently planning to do the next steps of working with the community on a vision for this site. So that's what I have right now. I'm willing to answer questions about that. Anything that might come up?
I just have one quick question. If you could remind us the wooded area between Takoma Overlook and Erskine Drive, who owns that? This area here.
The area on the right side, yeah, that's right. That's not Takoma Overlook right there. That's but between our property and the backs of the homes, I mean, it backs up to homes. It's just where on this picture it says site. That's a wooded area that's non-buildable.
Right.
That has basically a conservation easement on it. So it limits the developable portion of the property.
If I may, the state map says that the stretch of land behind the apartments or to the side of the apartments is part of the Takoma Overlook condominium property.
Okay. Yeah. But the
not the one in the front part of the property.
Right, but if you're looking on this, see where it says site and the line that's there, right. That backs up to the properties of homes.
Right, but I was not.
You were talking about farther up?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You got me. But that is also helpful information to remind us all that area has a conservation easement on
That's
it
right.
and is not buildable.
That's right.
Both points are important.
And that is once again, that is exactly which area.
So if on this little drawing, you see the word that says site, that's over the trees that are in this area. So there's a segment, if you go on the development project page, you can see the actual lines of the developable area and the non-developable area.
So the non-developable area that has the conservation easement on it is part of
this property
site.
that Park and Planning owns, yeah. I know that there has been interest about property on the other side of the building, the green area, and whether there could be something that extends past the property of this would obviously have to be a purchase agreement with the entities that own it. For years, this was very soft, and in fact, Park and Planning from Prince George's County, when this was in Prince George's County, had a playground on that green space that wasn't on their property at all. They had just put it out there, so it was just kind of used like that. When it was finally realized during unification transition stuff that it wasn't even on their property, it was getting old too. They took it down, and so it's
That's a triangular area.
Yeah.
Yeah. Councilman Searcy?
So I just want to echo the weirdness that happens with the property lines. If you could have a tour by either, management for Hampshire Towers or condo board members over at Takoma Overlook, it gets real fun because it splits in the parking lot who owns what. So definitely it's going to be a challenge I don't think that it's insurmountable, but it will require definite engagement as it relates to the neighboring properties. Excited to hear about like more than a possibility, like a path forward in terms of the likelihood of the land swap moving forward. I think one thing that will be important, you had mentioned earlier that there were community meetings, and I took a look at some of the data and the attendance of some of those town hall meetings, and it was quite poor. So I do believe, that the desire for improvement of the recreation center is not just limited to those participants that relate to the Friends of the Rec. It's actually, a lot of residents in that area care deeply about the recreation center and seeing something of value there. It is the one place that a number of neighborhood associations in the area can use in terms of meeting space. So there's definitely interest. I think the challenge is going to be ensuring that we are communicating with residents about what's happening and what the potential plans are, and that we're taking active approaches to engage them. I think another thing that's going to be important is that we do that prior to perhaps going down the path again of some sort of solicitation.
If I may interrupt just for a moment, I mean, one of the things that was tough about getting people to participate early on is that everything was so vague and everything was so far away. And when you have something way in the distance, it's hard to get people to a meeting and talk about vision and stuff. So I think one nice thing is if we're actually making some progress with a land swap, it starts to feel a little more real, and I think we'll have a little bit more opportunity to do some constructive work with folks.
And I would encourage the possibility of starting to think now about third parties we could bring in that could kind of bridge the consistency gap. Having people who are perhaps not wedded to whatever private party we bring in for development, but who are already establishing relationships throughout the community to kind of hear what people want, and then from there make the necessary progress towards community engagement in terms of like charrettes and things around a design. So I think that's going to be important. I also think that it's going to be important for us to start thinking now about ways to fill the gap. I've explained to residents the gaps that we have right now and what may expand as a result of our ownership of the rec center. I've explained to residents that this is a marathon and not a sprint. And so it's going to be a number of years before you're actually going to see a shovel-ready project. And we already know that we have waiting lists for recreational services in the city. And we already know that there's a demand there. And while I talked earlier about, fundraising for the purpose of a very specific thing that certain residents in the community might want, I do think that it may be important for us to try to rally all residents around the city in terms of resources and potential alternative locations for recreation services, so that we are able to continue to expand and meet the demand for recreational services, while at the same time ensuring that people who want to donate and give towards recreation services across the city are able to do so. And then lastly, just making sure that when we are taking the necessary steps forward towards soliciting either a partner or ourselves, or however we decide to actually move forward with the actual parcel, it would be helpful before we start issuing solicitations that the council has an agreed upon vision, and that we've communicated that, and that we are sure about what it is that we want as a council, that we can communicate that to you all, that we can communicate that more broadly, such that those solicitations are very targeted. It was very vague because the vision was very vague. And without vision, you go nowhere, which is what happened in this case. So I do think it's going to be important for my colleagues to make sure that we're at least having some additional work sessions and discussions about what we hope to see on this parcel. And it was brought up earlier about the moratorium. The rec center is also located in one of the opportunity zones that have been identified. The census tracts has been identified through the federal opportunity zone program, yada, yada, yada. One of the things that I think is going to be important, and I know that there'll be additional discussions, making sure that we're all on the same page in terms of the program requirements, but I'm starting to read up, I'm starting to learn. And it seems like there is a timeline, a time limit in terms of how long we would be designated, or these particular census tracts that are covered would be considered a designated zone. And I think it may be 10 years, I'm not sure. How many? Less than that, yeah. So we don't have a lot of time. So if the idea is to try to leverage those resources that may be available for reinvestment, particularly in the Crossroads area, we don't have a lot of time to waste in terms of identifying those opportunities and trying to leverage those funds. So if that is the case, then we might want to prioritize moving forward in terms of identifying potential development partners, potential resource allocations, and definitely having conversations with the county to ensure that they understand that a moratorium on housing, particularly on the city of Takoma Park, would limit our ability to move forward in terms of our designation as an opportunity zone. Okay. Thank you.
I would like to just speak just one moment too about, pick up on a point that you talked about what kind of happens in the meantime while we're getting through this. We already are doing some, I think, creative efforts about, we've got one of our new rec staff people who's actually looking to go into apartment buildings and do the activities within in apartment buildings. So we don't have to do it always in a city facility. Can go where the people need it. And I think, especially as we go through some facility changes, we're going to have to be more creative with that. So that's a different discussion, but it's something that we're working on because we know we need to not just rely on our facilities.
Councilmember Smith?
I'll be quick. It's already 10 o'clock. One, I want to thank Councilmember Searcy and Tony Hines and Wayne Sherwood for hosting the meeting last week at the Rec Center. I thought it was really important. And Councilmember Dybala was there. I would like to say that I support us going forward with this land swap as soon as possible. Previous councils have discussed this. I think they gave direction that we would do this land swap. So whatever letter that needs to be sent, I think should be drafted immediately so that council can discuss it in a work session so we can get it out the door and we can move forward on this. I agree with Councilmember Searcy in the direction and vision that she has for Ward 6. I mean, this is her ward, so I think she should lead the effort. The one thing that I would think would be something that we consider is that one of the entities that responded to the request for interest proposed another location for a rec center. I think that's something that we should get in front of through Councilmember Searcy, maybe looking at other sites in Ward 6 that potentially could be a future rec center for the city, so that if that becomes a reality, or that is the development partner that the city wants to go with, we're not trying to catch up and figure out where we're going to find another location for a rec center. Thank you.
Councilwoman Dybala?
Yeah, if you're looking for a sense of this council, what they said, I'm on board with that completely. I found the meeting last week to be really, really useful in focusing on the different tracks that have to go on. So on the land swap, I'd like to see us move ahead as quickly as possible. I have a couple of specific questions on that, but before I ask those specific questions, as far as the concept and the neighborhood involvement in developing the concept for what would be in that what that would look like, I think we should move ahead on that too, so that we are, as you said, not running to catch up on July 1st, 2019, if that's the effective date. I'd like to see us move ahead on that other piece now too. And I have some thoughts about that. It's 10:20, I won't get into it.
I'm sorry,
but-
can I just ask a quick question here? Because I heard a couple of things that, one of the things Councilmember Searcy mentioned was to have council develop an agreed upon vision for things. And I think, I haven't heard that, I mean, that's a big discussion that you've not had. So I don't know that we can immediately, look for another location for rec facilities. That's not to say that we don't keep it in mind as we're looking for a lot of these, through these discussions. But that concerns me just until I hear an agreed upon kind of direction by council, or, which may need some community discussion. And so, and I don't know exactly, Councilmember Davala, what you might mean about move ahead on something for July of 2019 other than the land swap. So it's not so.
Yeah, you first.
Okay, I'll just say this. One, previous councils have talked about this. I just think that we could have a discussion before the land swap to provide a vision of where the council wants to go with this project. I think we could do it in, on a number of nights. We could, have this discussion on nights that we don't even have council. But I think this is a priority. We've been talking about this for a long time, and we should give the community some type of actionable plan that we can say, this is where we're going with this. It's not going to happen 2 years from now, but we've actually started planning and moving the rec center in this direction. Because,
I appreciate all that, and I think it'll be, and I don't want to take more time on these things, but there's a huge list of priorities and work programs even for you all over the next few months, so we'll need to figure out how those priorities fit in. Yes, I would love to move forward on this. We've also got all the economic development and housing stuff, and there's going to be more Takoma Junction stuff, and there's, a variety. There's trees, and there's, so a number of, so I just want to just say how this all fits together. We have to think really carefully about it.
I actually think that this particular project, because of where it's located and the fact that it is a part of an opportunity zone, means that it overlaps completely with our economic development activities as well as our housing activities.
I agree with that.
So when we're thinking about where we should prioritize our efforts, this could potentially be an opportunity that meets multiple priorities by devoting the right amount of resources and efforts to it now, such that we can really maximize the opportunity that is now before us. If we don't, if we drag our feet, then we may be behind the 8 ball in terms of identifying state level money that could help further the effort. So I would definitely encourage us to prioritize this because it meets a number of the city's goals. And now that we're in a place where a land swap is really feasible, is the time for us to really kind of get our plans together. Thanks.
So I also think that we have a willing and eager recreation committee and Friends of Takoma, friends of those folks, Friends of the Rec Center, that would step up to help provide some of the effort here that needs to be expended to get out into the neighborhoods and find out what the concepts are that they have and how we can help us put it together. And so I would like to move ahead with that piece using resources outside of staff, which I understand is, a little coordination effort, but I think there's people that are willing to do it. Can I get back to the land swap or not? Are we done with the bigger picture?
Can I just just put forward, since we're here, a proposal for kind of next steps? We'll come back to the land swap, but I have a feeling that there's going to be consensus across the board that we want to move forward with the land swap as quickly as possible. So I think we can check that box. And in terms of vision and looking at what we want to move forward with this, one of the things that I would like to explore in the short term is what a process would look like and the cost to be if we did have an outside firm help us through this process. One of the things that Councilmember Kovar and I have been involved with in the last few months is this next phase of the building of the Math Science Building at Montgomery College. And they have engaged a firm that is doing, helping through some of the community engagement process. I think there's a lot of benefit in having an outside firm do the engagement process. I very much appreciate the volunteers, our rec committee, the Friends of the New Hampshire Rec Center, and the expertise on our city staff. But having witnessed this project through Montgomery College, I also see the added benefit of having that. I have no idea what the cost is to that and what that would look like, but I do think in terms of planning for next steps, that could be something that could hopefully, at least some exploration of that, be brought to council so that we could decide in the short term which direction do we want to go. Do we want to try and engage an outside firm to then help us through this process and think through it, spend the resources to do that, or like similarly how we've done things in the past, maybe hire consultants along the way, but really run this through our current staff and our volunteers and the council. I think those are two different paths. I think we need more information about cost and things before that. I know without that information where I lean right now, and I think we probably lean in the same place, but I think, and we can discuss further the timeline on that, but I do think in terms of what Councilwoman Searcy has talked about, that would at least provide us over the next few weeks a better sense of the direction we want to take. Yes.
I agree with you. I think I look forward to seeing what the estimates are on that and what the ideas are that the city manager has for following through with that. But I think at the same time, we should be prepared to give direction to the Recreation Committee on what role that they need to prepare to play in that same process.
Yes, I completely agree with that.
Would we be wanting to do that tonight, at least as a preliminary?
Absolutely not. I will say it is 10:30.
And
frankly, I know
they're not here right now.
They're not here.
But that's
I
just so
think
great
that
to
is
volunteer
not. I'm not sure that would be a wise thing to do at 10:30 at night, and I'm not sure we would be coherent. And while I am very much committed to finding a vision and moving this forward, I want to do this well, and thoughtfully, and quite frankly, I have not personally put enough thought into it tonight to then give a committee direction. In addition, I think one of the things that we've been trying to do with our committees, we've done this with the Tree Commission, we've done it with our Police Advisory Committee, and we've done it with the Committee on the Environment, is set up a time where we have a joint meeting with our rec committee to sit down and talk through priorities. I think that would be a better path forward on this. And I know while a number of members of the City Council have had the opportunity to meet with and were invited to the meeting with the Friends of the New Hampshire Rec Center, not all of us were part of that. And so I also think that it may be helpful if those of us who weren't at that meeting also have some conversations with the representatives from that group. So with that, seeing that it is 10:30, moving forward on we can get to, but in general, moving forward on the land swap, we'll get to Councilwoman DeBaller's specific questions and this idea of directing staff to provide some estimates and look at what a path forward would be in terms of engaging an outside firm versus doing things more in-house and with our current staff, and then coming back to us on that. We're good? All right, back to you.
Okay, so the reason I'm asking all these questions is because for me, in case it wasn't crystal clear, I would like to be moving in a couple of parallel tracks as much as possible. so that when the land swap is finalized, the other pieces are moving, or have already moved forward a bit. Because I'm mindful of the opportunity zone, and, and some of the other time-sensitive possibilities that are available. So with that in mind, you said a possible effective date might be July 1st of next year. Would you be thinking that a signature date would be sooner than that?
Oh, yeah.
So that,
But
that
it
there
takes,
be...
but it, this actually takes it's got to go through the process with the commission and everything. I mean, it takes a while.
What I'm thinking is if it's an effective date of July 1st for budget and other reasons, but if there's a signature date that's sooner than that, then that's another reason for residents to get engaged. That's progress, that's a step forward. So if we can say, when it's signed, whenever that is, yeah, we just did this and it's going to be effective in a few months, but we know we're doing it, that's just another reason for people to show up. It's less vague. So that's why I ask.
Can I ask a clarifying question? Because I think I'm under a different assumption than Councilwoman Dabala. When I see the land swap, I think it's very important, but I'm also seeing it as likely that not much is going to change in a short period of time.
That's
So
right.
whether we had signed it effective July 1st versus March 3rd or whatever, I don't see us, like, once we get it, it's not like the next day we're going to be changing our programming or anything. So I agree with you there. It should be a parallel process, and we should begin this visioning and doing all this work, but I'm just sort of trying to
Yeah, I was
understand.
talking about when it's signed, when the deal is set, not when the deal takes effect. And I guess I assumed they were going to be two different dates.
I think that your general point is that people will have a sense that it's really moving forward, and we'll have a number of different steps that'll make it clear that it's really moving forward.
All right. And maybe you don't need to say this now, but I'd be interested at some point in the specifics of what happens to the current recreation reimbursement and whether there's cash changing hands, all that. We don't need to get into all of that
Well,
now.
I think it's an important point. It's at this point, that agreement with the county continues. It doesn't necessarily disappear when the property is ours. I have been having conversations with county council members and potential county council members, and have in the past, and they always say they want to continue to be a partner. I want more money than $85,000.
Well,
And I
that's
think
where I was
that, part of the discussion is that the goals that I have heard for this parcel are also goals of a number of folks in the county. And so, this is one of those few places where there might actually be an opportunity to do something. And so, as you have conversations with potential council members and potential county executives, et cetera, the more that we say, we want a partnership on this, and, the better.
Right.
But we don't have, we can't get anything at this point that is a definitive that the money will go away or will not. I don't have,
Okay.
I don't think that's able to be done.
And although we can't get a definitive answer just yet from the county in terms of what the future funding would be, do we at least know what level of money, if the county were to provide us, should we own the rec that we would want? So are we saying, could we have a more specific ask as we're engaging county council members around ownership, plans for the area, the fact that, if we could get $100,000 annually to
Right.
support services?
I think that we've calculated that. I think it's somewhere in the $125,000 range. It would be, if you said, the cost of providing the programming and the kinds of ongoing operating costs that you would have as a contractor. So that's been kind of the number that's been floated around, right? Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
My last question, you'll be so happy to hear that last. has to do with the lot that's part of the land swap. And right now, it is contiguous to Maryland Park and Planning land that's already owned. Is that correct?
Yes.
And so it's between Glenside and
It's
the
between
back of-
Jackson and Jackson. Yeah, so if you look at a map.
I'm looking at the map.
If Jackson Avenue could go down and up, that's
If it
where it
could
is.
continue, that's where it is,
Yeah.
and it doesn't continue because
That's
it's
right. It's in 3 parts.
3 parts. Okay. Just wanted that to be clear for people who live near there.
Right.
Yeah, so it's existing open space that connects to existing open space
That's
in
right.
that stream corridor.
That's right.
It's just a question of who has the paper that says that they're only
That's right.
managing it.
That's right. And the Park and Planning has a particular love for its Stream Valley parks. It is,
Well,
it's a priority for
yeah.
it. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Kovar.
Am I the last speaker?
No.
Oh, okay.
Well, it's on.
I'll try to be quick. So I do think also that the land swap should be completed as soon as possible. It sounds to me like, though, the dollar amount that goes with it should be figured out at the same time, whatever that's going to be, if we can. I mean, do you think we lose or gain? Do we lose or gain leverage if we do the land swap first?
The problem is that the monetary amount comes from Montgomery County. The land swap is with Park and Planning.
Okay.
So they're two different things.
Okay, that's helpful. I did want to recognize, since he is continuing to sit here, that Wayne Sherwood, who has been one of the community leaders in pushing for this, and Wayne circulated an email recently that challenged us to think about this as more than just, quote unquote, fixing up, this isn't his words, just fixing up the rec center, but making the rec center better, but having other kind of community-oriented space, if I can use that term. And to me, that makes a lot of sense, and I'd like to see us take steps like that. The challenge, of course, is figuring out what the community really wants, and I don't get a sense that we know that yet, and I'm glad the mayor mentioned that one option. I don't know if that's the best way to do it, but I was struck. I think Council Member Searcy said this also. There wasn't a huge turnout at when we met at the rec center, in part to talk about the rec center. So I think we have to find other methods to really reach out and figure out what the community is interested in, as opposed to just us sort of saying, here's what we've decided. Not that I think anyone up here was saying that, but I think that could take us quite a few months to really get to it. I also think that we should make it clear to folks, and this has been a challenge in some of the other big projects that we've undertaken, we can't figure everything out completely right at the beginning.
Right.
So in other words, it's got to unfold
It goes
gradually.
back and forth.
Yeah, and you can all imagine other projects in the city that comment might apply to. But I think, you know, having the land swap underway is really important because it signals to people this could be real. And starting to find out what people might want in a facility like this is an important step. I think it was useful to have the 4 or 5 entities that responded to the initial solicitation, even though they varied widely, because it kind of started to give us a sense for what's even possible. And it doesn't mean we have to do any of those things, but I think that's going to continue to be the process, as opposed to by July 1st or by July 1st or any day, here's everything that's going to happen. It's going to be a gradual process, and the residents have to be involved the whole way. So I just think for me, you know, my son played there a lot when he was growing up. I spent a lot of time there watching him and trying to avoid getting squashed because the space is so small next to the basketball court, and we really need to try to address it. I'm glad that the land swap looks like it can happen, and I'd like to see us really delve into how best to kind of take the temperature on what residents would like to see. Thank you.
Councilmember Siemens.
Thank you, Mayor. I would just like to agree with what I've heard from my colleagues here. I don't think there's been a great deal of disagreement on this subject, but I did want to make special thank you for the city manager for the historical perspective you gave at the beginning of this discussion. I think you understated how long that we've been working on this, and I think it's important because as we are gnashing at the bit to get this all done and something new and glorious, we have to recognize how long it's taken us to get to this point, how important this point is, and how much is left to be done. And so we, as the mayor said, don't want to be too optimistic that this is going to be resolved in the near term. Thank you.
Councilwoman Costa.
Thank you. I'll be brief. I also support moving ahead with the land swap and doing so quickly. I like the idea of exploring working with a firm to manage the process, and I think as we are going out and talking with residents, as we're working with a firm, if we can find ways to encourage a look that delves a little beyond just the basics, I think that would be useful. I was looking at some of the questions that the studies that were done related, and the outreach that was done related to the rec center had posed, and those questions seemed to me very basic and not particularly imaginative, and I think what we got out of that was people just thinking about the sorts of programs that we have now and the sorts of things that are available to them now. And it sounds like all of us are interested in, and many of the members of the community are interested in exploring things that are really different and cutting edge and would really provide a lot of services to the community beyond maybe what we're doing now. So the more that we can incorporate different things into those discussions and maybe suggestions for alternatives, whether it's a childcare facility or a different type of rec program or whatever it is, to get people thinking a little differently, I think that would be very helpful. Thank you.
If I can just say, also when those questions were originally proposed, there was a real fear that there wouldn't be a rec center, that those facilities wouldn't be there. So part of this was to reinforce that people actually were interested in some basic recreation. So there may have been a little bit of steering about that at that time.
Councilwoman Searcy, last words?
Sorry, but I can't shut up. Totally agree with the points raised. I also think when it comes to identifying needs, there are a number of data collection efforts that are underway. We have the city wide survey that will give some insights, focus groups that are happening that should give some insights, and there are also maybe other opportunities to get insights in terms of bringing residents together and kind of using that third party. I know Councilmember Kovar brought up the fact that it's going to be iterative. Completely understand and completely agree. And although, having the prior four groups come in and kind of present was helpful to the council, it was not helpful to them. They spent a lot of money to put together those plans. And so, and I actually had an opportunity to talk to one of them, and two of them actually, and they said we spent a lot of time and a lot of money because we were hoping to get a job out of this. So I do think it's important for us to think about what it is that we as a council want to get out of this project, even if it is rec and housing. At least that way we can give people a clear path forward when they're giving us feedback on, a solicitation. We have to keep in mind that people aren't in the business of developing designs and hiring architects and landscape folks just for the fun of it. They're doing it for a job. So the more that we can do to make sure that we're all on the same page in terms of what we want before we put those calls out, I think is important. Thank you.
I lied, Councilmember Smith.
Just real quick, Tony Hines sent me an email. He said that he is a referee for some soccer program, and he is willing to do an assessment with the parents that attend the program and have kids that use the New Hampshire Avenue Rec Center. So he just wants to get the green light from council and staff that that's something that we would find value in.
I've done lots of going back and forth with Tony. I actually am encouraging him to have conversations with the rec committee, as well as Friends of the Rec, to try to make sure that we're not duplicating efforts, and to also have conversations with you because there are a lot of data collection efforts underway, and there's lots of stuff that has already been collected, and I think it would be beneficial to have someone like Tony helping us with kind of going through what was old, what's new, where the gaps are, and then making sure that any new data collection kind of fills the gaps versus doing something that repeats. Yep.
All right, I think, does the staff feel like you have enough direction on this
Yeah,
one?
I appreciate very much the support for the land swap. That will be something that we'll be bringing back to you, as well as the additional information you've asked for, and look
Great.
forward to working on it.
Terrific. And I just want to take this opportunity, since we do have our director of our recreation department here, just to say thank you very much. I think in my time over the last few years, we have really seen a lot of changes in our recreation department and in the programs. And I think, as Councilwoman Kostick had mentioned, there's a lot of innovation going on in our rec department. And so I just want to say thank you. It's exciting to be here in the building and to hear about, and not just here, but as the city manager said, all the things that the staff is doing. So thank you very much for it. And yeah, and we're up, Councilwoman DeBala.
As a former rec committee member, I love hearing about oversubscribed programs, particularly for youth and seniors.
Great. And I just want a special thanks to Councilwoman Kostick for being over in our annex over there. And so, yes. All right. We are adjourned.